Welcome to my channel Midnight Stories, where you find horror stories that scare you. Before watching, please press like to support me in producing more stories. This helps in spreading the video and reaching more people. Thank you for your support and enjoy watching. The crisp mountain air filled my lungs as I hiked along the familiar trail near Cleetwood Cove. It was early September 2005, and I had been a park ranger at Crater Lake National Park for just over 4 years. My name is Ryan Holloway, and at 32 years old, I thought I had seen it all in my time patrolling these majestic woods. Little did I know that the events about to unfold would shatter my perception of reality and leave an indelible mark on my psyche. The day started like any other, a routine patrol to check for illegal campsites and ensure visitors weren't damaging the pristine environment. The sun was high in the sky, casting dappled shadows through the towering pines. As I made my way deeper into the forest, the usual symphony of nature surrounded me, the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant call of a Steller's jay, and the occasional scurrying of small animals in the underbrush. I paused for a moment, taking a swig from my water bottle and surveying the landscape. Crater Lake, with its deep blue waters, was just visible through a break in the trees. It was a view that never failed to take my breath away, no matter how many times I'd seen it. I allowed myself a small smile, thinking about how lucky I was to call this place my office. But as I continued my patrol, a nagging feeling began to creep over me. Something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but years of experience had honed my instincts, and right now, they were telling me that something wasn't right. The forest seemed quieter than usual, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness that set my nerves on edge. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the feeling as paranoia. After all, this was Crater Lake, one of the most beautiful and serene places in Oregon. What could possibly go wrong here? Still, I found myself gripping my radio a little tighter as I continued down the trail. As the afternoon wore on, I made my way towards the northern part of the park. This area was less frequented by casual tourists, mostly attracting seasoned hikers who knew their way around. I always enjoyed the solitude here, away from the bustling crowds near the lodge and popular viewpoints. But today that solitude felt oppressive. The trees seemed to loom over me, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. Shadows deepened despite the bright afternoon sun. And then, as I rounded a bend in the trail, it hit me. A smell so foul it stopped me dead in my tracks. The stench of decay was unmistakable, but this was different from anything I'd encountered before. It wasn't the usual odor of a dead animal or rotting vegetation. This smell was more potent, more wrong. It clung to the back of my throat, making me gag. My training kicked in and I reached for my radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Holloway. I've picked up a strong odor of decay near the northern trail. Going to investigate. Over." The radio crackled to life. "Copy that, Holloway. Be careful out there. Report back in 15 minutes. Over." "Will do. Holloway out." With a deep breath, immediately regretted due to the stench, I started following the odor. Every step I took increased my sense of dread. The forest had fallen completely silent now, as if holding its breath in anticipation of what I might find. As I pushed through a dense thicket, the smell became overpowering, and then in a small clearing ahead, I saw it, a shape on the ground, partially obscured by fallen leaves. Even from a distance, I could tell it wasn't an animal. My heart began to race as I approached, the realization dawning on me that I was about to face something far worse than I had ever encountered in my years as a park ranger. Little did I know this discovery would be just the beginning of a nightmare that would push me to the very limits of my sanity and challenge everything I thought I knew about the natural world. As I approached the prone figure on the forest floor, the acrid smell of decay intensified, forcing me to breathe through my mouth. My mind raced, trying to prepare myself for what I was about to see, but nothing could have truly readied me for the horrific sight that awaited. The body lay face down, half buried in a bed of damp leaves and pine needles. From my initial vantage point, I could see that the victim was male, probably in his mid-30s. He was dressed in hiking gear, or what was left of it. The clothes were in tatters, torn and shredded as if by some ferocious animal attack. But as I drew closer, my blood ran cold. This wasn't the work of any animal I'd ever encountered in these woods. The wounds were too precise, too deliberate. Long, deep gashes ran the length of the man's back, exposing gleaming white bone in places. His limbs were bent at unnatural angles, clearly broken in multiple places. Fighting back the urge to vomit, I fumbled for my radio. "Dispatch, this is Holloway. I've found a body. Male, mid-30s. It's bad. Really bad. Sending coordinates now. We need the sheriff and a forensics team out here, ASAP." "Copy that, Holloway. Stay put. Backup is on the way." I knew I shouldn't disturb the scene, but something compelled me to get a closer look. Pulling on a pair of latex gloves from my kit, I carefully approached the body. The skin was a sickly grayish white, bloated and mottled with dark bruises. This poor soul had been out here for days, maybe even weeks. With a deep breath to steel myself, I gently rolled the body over. The face that greeted me would haunt my nightmares for years to come. What was once a human visage was now a mangled mess of torn flesh and exposed muscle. The eyes were gone, leaving behind dark, empty sockets that seemed to stare accusingly at me. The mouth was frozen open in a silent scream, teeth bared in a grotesque rictus of fear. But it was the wounds that truly chilled me to the bone. The face and neck were covered in dozens, maybe hundreds of small, precise cuts. They formed intricate patterns, almost like writing. My mind reeled, unable to process what I was seeing. This wasn't the random savagery of an animal attack. This was methodical, intentional. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. What could have done this? My eyes darted around the clearing, half expecting to see some monstrous creature lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing. Just the eerie silence of the forest and the mutilated corpse at my feet. Time seemed to stretch as I waited for backup to arrive. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. I found myself gripping my sidearm, a weapon I'd never had to use in all my years as a ranger. But now, faced with evidence of such brutality, I felt woefully unprepared. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the sound of approaching vehicles. Relief washed over me as Sheriff Donovan and his deputies arrived on the scene. The sheriff, a grizzled veteran of law enforcement, took one look at the body and let out a low whistle. "Jesus H. Christ," he muttered, his face pale. "What the hell happened here, Holloway?" I shook my head, still struggling to find words. I don't know, sir. I've never seen anything like this. It's not an animal attack, at least not any animal I know of." Donovan's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the scene. "No, this ain't no animal. This is something else entirely." He turned to his deputies. "Secure the area. I want this entire section of the park locked down tight. Nobody in or out without my say-so." As the forensics team arrived and began their grim work, Donovan pulled me aside. "Holloway, I need you to keep this quiet for now. Last thing we need is panic spreading through the park. You didn't see anyone or anything suspicious while you were out here?" I shook my head. "Nothing out of the ordinary until I found this." The sheriff nodded, his expression grave. "All right. I want you to do another sweep of the area. Maybe our killer left some tracks we can follow. But be careful, you hear me? Whatever did this might still be out there." As I set off to search the surrounding forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The trees seemed to close in around me, their shadows growing longer and darker with each passing minute. The forest I once thought I knew so well now felt alien and hostile. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The horrors that awaited me in the coming days would test the limits of my sanity and challenge everything I thought I knew about the natural world. As I ventured deeper into the woods, I couldn't help but wonder what kind of monster was lurking in the shadows of Crater Lake, and would I be its next victim? The next few days passed in a blur of activity. The discovery of the mutilated body had set off a firestorm of investigation and speculation. Park officials were scrambling to keep the incident under wraps, but rumors were already starting to spread among the staff and more observant visitors. I found myself unable to sleep, plagued by nightmares of that grotesque face and the bizarre, almost ritualistic wounds. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those empty sockets staring back at me, accusing me of some unknown crime. On the third night after the discovery, I was on late patrol. The moon hung low and heavy in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. The forest seemed different now, no longer the familiar, welcoming place I'd come to love. Every shadow held potential danger, every rustle of leaves a possible threat. As I made my way along the shoreline of Crater Lake, my flashlight beam dancing across the obsidian waters, I heard something that made my blood run cold, a scream, distant but unmistakable. It was a sound of pure terror, abruptly cut short. My heart racing, I radioed in. "Dispatch, this is Holloway. I just heard a scream near the eastern shore. Requesting backup. I'm going to investigate." "Copy that, Holloway. Backup is on the way. Be careful out there." I knew I should wait for support, but something drove me forward. The memory of that mutilated body spurred me on. If there was someone out there in danger, I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. I plunged into the forest, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The underbrush seemed to grab at my legs, slowing my progress. The air grew thick and heavy, filled with an oppressive silence that pressed in on me from all sides. And then I smelled it, that same sickly sweet odor of decay that had led me to the first body. My stomach churned, but I pressed on, following the scent deeper into the woods. I emerged into a small clearing and immediately wished I hadn't. The beam of my flashlight fell on a scene of carnage that defied belief. Another body, or what was left of it. The torso had been split open, ribs splayed outward like some macabre flower. The lower half was gone, just gone. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. This was fresh. Whatever had done this was still nearby. As if in response to my thought, a twig snapped somewhere in the darkness behind me. I whirled around, my hand flying to my sidearm. The beam of my flashlight danced wildly across the trees, searching for the source of the sound. For a moment I thought I saw something. A shadow, darker than the surrounding night, moving with unnatural speed. "This is Park Ranger Holloway," I called out, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to sound authoritative. "Identify yourself." Silence. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, a sound that would haunt me for the rest of my days. A laugh. Low, guttural, utterly inhuman. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing through the trees. I ran. Pride and duty be damned, I ran as fast as my legs would carry me. Branches whipped at my face, roots threatened to trip me at every step, but I didn't slow down. That laugh followed me, growing louder, closer. I burst out of the tree line onto the main road, gasping for breath. In the distance, I could see the flashing lights of approaching vehicles. Backup had finally arrived. As Sheriff Donovan and his deputies piled out of their cars, I tried to explain what I'd seen, what I'd heard. But the words seemed inadequate, unable to convey the sheer horror of what I'd experienced. Donovan's face grew grimmer with each passing moment. "All right, Holloway, we're going to check it out, but you're staying here. You've been through enough tonight." As the search party disappeared into the woods, I slumped against a patrol car, my mind reeling. What was out there? What kind of creature could do such things? And why did I have the sickening feeling that this was far from over? The night wore on, and eventually the search party returned. They had found the second body, just as I'd described it. But there was no sign of the thing I'd heard. No tracks, no trace of its passage. It was as if it had simply vanished into thin air. As dawn broke over Crater Lake, casting a deceptively peaceful light over the landscape, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were dealing with something far beyond our understanding. Something ancient, something evil had awakened in these woods. And I had a terrible feeling that it was just getting started. The days that followed were a blur of increased patrols, tense meetings, and sleepless nights. The park remained open, but with heightened security measures in place. We couldn't close it entirely without raising too many questions, but we did our best to steer visitors away from the areas where the bodies had been found. I threw myself into my work, pushing myself to exhaustion in an attempt to keep the nightmares at bay. But even in my waking hours, I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. Every time I ventured into the forest, I felt eyes on me, boring into the back of my skull. More than once I caught myself jumping at shadows, my hand flying to my sidearm at the slightest provocation. It was on one such patrol, about a week after the second body was discovered, that things took an even stranger turn. I was deep in the northern part of the park, an area we had largely cordoned off from the public. The day was overcast, a heavy mist clinging to the treetops and obscuring the distant peaks. As I made my way along a narrow game trail, I noticed something odd. The forest had fallen silent again, but this time it was different. Instead of the oppressive, threatening silence I'd experienced before, this felt expectant, as if the very trees were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. And then I heard it. A whisper, so faint I almost missed it. I froze, straining my ears to catch it again. There, barely audible, but unmistakable. Words in a language I didn't recognize. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, carried on the wind itself. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and weak in the eerie stillness. "Is someone there?" The whispering intensified, growing louder but no more intelligible. It was joined by other voices, a cacophony of unintelligible murmurs that seemed to press in on me from all sides. I spun in place, trying to locate the source, but it was futile. The voices were all around me, in the trees, in the ground, in the very air I breathed. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, heart pounding, sweat beading on my forehead despite the cool air. What the hell had just happened? As I tried to collect myself, I noticed something on the ground a few feet away. Approaching cautiously, I saw that it was a small, intricately carved wooden figurine. It depicted some kind of creature, vaguely humanoid but with elongated limbs and a head that was decidedly not human. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every detail rendered with painstaking care. I reached down to pick it up, but as my fingers brushed its surface, a jolt of electricity seemed to surge through my body. Images flashed through my mind, ancient forests, darker and more primeval than anything I'd ever seen, strange, shadowy figures moving through the undergrowth, and something else, something vast and terrifying that lurked just beyond the edge of perception. I jerked my hand back, gasping. The figurine lay innocently on the forest floor, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was somehow watching me. With trembling hands, I pulled out an evidence bag from my kit and carefully scooped up the object without touching it directly. As I sealed the bag, a chill wind whipped through the trees, carrying with it the faintest echo of those otherworldly whispers. I didn't wait around to hear more. I practically ran back to my vehicle, the evidence bag clutched tightly to my chest. Back at the ranger station, I hesitated before reporting my find. The rational part of my mind argued that I should turn the figurine over to Sheriff Donovan immediately. But something held me back, a nagging feeling that this object was meant for me, that it held answers to questions I hadn't even begun to formulate. In the end, I compromised. I logged the discovery of an unidentified wooden object in my patrol report, but kept the details vague. The figurine itself I locked away in my locker, telling myself I'd hand it over to the authorities in the morning after I'd had a chance to examine it more closely. That night, as I tossed and turned in my bed, unable to sleep, my thoughts kept returning to the strange artifact. What was it? Where had it come from? And why did I feel so drawn to it? At around 2 a.m. I gave up on sleep. Dressing quickly, I made my way back to the ranger station. The night was eerily still, the usual chorus of nocturnal creatures, conspicuously absent. Inside the station, I retrieved the figurine from my locker. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, it seemed even more intricate, more alien. I found myself tracing the contours of the carved creature with my eyes, marveling at the craftsmanship. And then, almost without realizing it, I was reaching out to touch it again. As my fingertips made contact with the smooth wood, the world around me seemed to blur and shift. The fluorescent lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. But I wasn't in the ranger station anymore, or at least it didn't feel like I was. I found myself in a vast, primordial forest. The trees towered impossibly high, their canopies lost in a mist that seemed to glow with an inner light. The air was thick and humid, filled with the buzz of insects and the calls of creatures I couldn't identify. And there, moving through the underbrush with fluid, inhuman grace, were the figures I'd glimpsed in my earlier vision. They were tall, far taller than any human, with elongated limbs and bodies covered in what looked like a mixture of fur and scales. Their heads were elongated with no discernible eyes or mouth, yet I could feel their awareness, their ancient intelligence. They moved purposefully, converging on a clearing up ahead. As I watched, unable to move, unable to look away, I saw what awaited them there. It was vast, a creature of such immense size and alien form that my mind struggled to comprehend it. It seemed to shift and change as I looked at it, sometimes appearing as a writhing mass of tentacles, other times as a gargantuan insectoid form. The smaller creatures prostrated themselves before this eldritch monstrosity, and I felt waves of psychic energy washing over me. Thoughts and images too fast and too strange for me to fully grasp flooded my mind. I saw glimpses of other worlds, of cosmic cycles beyond human understanding, of a hunger that spanned millennia. And then, with a suddenness that left me gasping, I was back in the ranger station. The figurine lay on the floor where I'd dropped it, innocuous once more. But I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that what I'd seen was real, or at least as real as anything could be in a world where such things existed. As I sat there trying to process what had just happened, a new sound reached my ears, a scream, distant but unmistakable, echoing through the night. And I knew, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that our nightmare was far from over. The scream galvanized me into action. I snatched up my radio, barking out a call for backup as I raced for my vehicle. The night air was heavy with an unnatural chill as I sped down the winding park roads, my headlights cutting through a mist that seemed to have materialized out of nowhere. I followed the sound to a campground near the lake's edge, one that should have been empty given our recent restrictions. As I pulled up, my headlights illuminated a scene of chaos. Tents lay in shreds, camping gear scattered across the ground as if tossed by a violent storm. And there, at the water's edge, was a sight that made my blood run cold. A figure, hunched over something on the ground. Even from a distance, I could see that it was too tall, too thin to be human, its limbs bent at impossible angles, its skin a mottled gray that seemed to shimmer and shift in the moonlight. I drew my weapon, my hands shaking as I stepped out of the vehicle. "Park Ranger," I shouted, my voice sounding thin and weak in the oppressive silence. "Step away from—" The creature's head snapped up and I felt my words die in my throat. Its face, if you could call it that, was a nightmare of misplaced features and glistening, chitinous plates. Multiple eyes, black as pitch, fixed on me with an intelligence that was anything but animal. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, we stared at each other. Then, with a speed that defied belief, it moved. 1 second it was by the lake, the next it was rushing towards me, covering the distance in impossible bounds. I fired, the rapport of my pistol shattering the night's silence. The creature didn't even flinch as the bullet struck it, its hide seeming to ripple and absorb the impacts. In the blink of an eye, it was upon me. A clawed hand, surprisingly cold and dry, closed around my throat. I was lifted off my feet as if I weighed nothing, brought face to face with the monstrosity. This close, I could smell its breath, an ancient, musty odor that spoke of deep caves and lost epochs. As I struggled for air, my vision beginning to darken at the edges, I saw something that chilled me even more than the creature's appearance. In its free hand it held the wooden figurine I'd found in the forest. It brought the carving up to its face, and I watched in horror as the wood seemed to melt and flow, reshaping itself into a perfect miniature of the being that held me. Just as I was sure I was about to lose consciousness, the sound of approaching sirens pierced the night. The creature's head whipped around, its grip on my throat loosening just enough for me to gasp in a desperate breath. Then, with a sound like tearing silk, it was gone, disappearing into the mist-shrouded forest with inhuman speed. I collapsed to the ground, coughing and retching as I fought to fill my lungs with air. By the time Sheriff Donovan and his deputies arrived, the creature was long gone, leaving behind only destruction and questions. As paramedics checked me over, I tried to explain what I'd seen, but the words felt inadequate, unable to convey the sheer otherworldliness of the encounter. Donovan listened with a grim expression, his eyes darting to the shadows beyond the campground as if expecting the creature to reappear at any moment. "Holloway," he said finally, his voice low and serious, "I think it's time we faced facts. Whatever's out there, it's not something we're equipped to handle. I'm calling in the feds." I nodded, too shaken to argue. As dawn broke over Crater Lake, casting a deceptively peaceful light over the scene of devastation, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the precipice of something far bigger and far more terrifying than any of us could imagine. The creature was still out there, watching, waiting, and somehow I knew that our encounter had only been the beginning. Whatever cosmic horror had awakened in the depths of Crater Lake, it wasn't going to rest until it had consumed everything in its path. As I watched the first rays of sunlight glint off the lake's surface, I found myself wondering, how do you fight something that shouldn't exist? And more importantly, what price would we have to pay to stop it? The next few days passed in a blur of increased security measures, tense meetings, and sleepless nights. True to his word, Sheriff Donovan had called in federal assistance. The official story was that we were dealing with a particularly aggressive and dangerous predator, possibly a bear or mountain lion that had developed a taste for human flesh. But I knew the truth. We all did, those of us who had seen the aftermath of the attacks, or in my case, faced the creature directly. This was no animal, at least not one known to science. This was something else entirely, something that defied our understanding of the natural world. The park remained open, but with severe restrictions in place. Most of the trails were closed, and visitors were confined to a small area near the lodge. Even then, we advised people to stay in groups and to be back inside well before sunset. I found myself assigned to work closely with the federal agents who had arrived to investigate. They were a mixed bunch. Some were clearly skeptical of the reports they'd received, while others seemed almost too eager to believe in the existence of something beyond the ordinary. One agent in particular, a woman named Dr. Samantha Reeves, took a keen interest in my experiences. She was a cryptozoologist, she explained, someone who studied animals whose existence was unproven by science. "What you've described, Ranger Holloway," she told me one evening as we pored over maps of the park, bears some similarities to legends from this region. The Native American tribes who lived here centuries ago spoke of shape-shifting creatures that dwelled in the depths of the lake. I thought back to the way the wooden figurine had seemed to melt and reshape itself in the creature's grasp. "Shape-shifting," I murmured. That actually makes a twisted kind of sense." Dr. Reeves nodded, her eyes bright with excitement despite the grim nature of our discussion. "The legends speak of beings that were here long before humans, entities that were neither fully physical nor fully spiritual. They were said to be able to take on any form they desired, often appearing as an amalgamation of different animals or as monstrous, unnatural beings." A chill ran down my spine as I recalled the creature's bizarre appearance, the way its features had seemed to shift and change even as I looked at it. "But why now?" I asked. "Why is this thing suddenly active after all this time?" The cryptozoologist's expression grew serious. "That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? In many of these legends, the creatures are awakened by some kind of disturbance, environmental changes, human activity, that sort of thing. Has there been anything unusual happening in the park recently? Anything at all?" I racked my brain, thinking back over the past few months. "Nothing major," I said slowly. "There was some minor seismic activity a few weeks before the first attack, but that's not uncommon in this area, and we've had a slightly higher water level in the lake due to increased rainfall, but again, nothing out of the ordinary." Dr. Reeves made a note in her journal. "It might not seem significant to us, but for a creature that's potentially been dormant for centuries, even small changes could be enough to trigger its awakening." As we continued to discuss theories and possible courses of action, I couldn't shake a growing sense of dread. We were dealing with something so far beyond our understanding, something that seemed to operate by its own set of rules. How could we hope to stop it? That night, as I tossed and turned in my bed, unable to sleep, I found my thoughts drifting back to the wooden figurine. I had told Dr. Reeves about it, of course, but I hadn't mentioned the strange vision I'd experienced when I touched it. Something held me back, a nagging feeling that there was more to that experience than I had yet realized. Just before dawn, I made a decision. I needed to see that figurine again. Maybe, just maybe, it held the key to understanding what we were up against. As the first light of day began to creep over the horizon, I made my way to the evidence locker where the figurine was being kept. My heart was pounding as I signed it out, citing the need for further examination. Back in my office, I carefully removed the carved piece from its evidence bag. It looked innocuous enough in the harsh fluorescent lighting, just a small wooden carving of an odd, vaguely humanoid creature. But as I held it in my hands, I could feel a faint vibration, a sense of latent energy waiting to be released. Taking a deep breath, I closed my eyes and focused my thoughts on the figurine. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, just as I was about to give up, I felt it, a sudden disorienting shift in my perception. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in my office. I stood on the shore of Crater Lake, but it was not the lake I knew. The water was black as ink, roiling with strange phosphorescent patterns. The sky above was a maelstrom of swirling, unnatural colors. And there, rising from the depths of the lake, was a sight that would haunt me for the rest of my days. It was the creature I had encountered, but vastly larger, its form constantly shifting and changing. One moment it was a writhing mass of tentacles, the next a towering insectoid monstrosity. As I watched, frozen in a mixture of awe and terror, I realized that this wasn't just a single entity. It was many, perhaps countless beings merged into one vast, incomprehensible whole, and it was awakening, stirring from an eons-long slumber. With a gasp, I found myself back in my office, the figurine clutched tightly in my trembling hands. As the first rays of sunlight began to filter through my window, I knew with a chilling certainty that we were running out of time. Whatever cosmic horror had made its home in Crater Lake, it was fully awake now, and it was hungry. The revelation from my vision left me shaken to my core. I knew I had to act, to share what I'd seen with Dr. Reeves and the others. But how could I explain something so utterly beyond the realm of normal experience? Would they even believe me? As I wrestled with this dilemma, reports began to come in of increased seismic activity around the lake. Tremors, barely noticeable at first, were growing in intensity. The lake itself seemed to be changing, its usually placid surface now roiling with unexplained currents and strange luminescent patterns that appeared and disappeared in the blink of an eye. It was Dr. Reeves who first made the connection. "The lake," she said, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Whatever's down there, it's not just awake, it's trying to get out." A hastily convened meeting of park officials, law enforcement, and the federal agents quickly reached a grim consensus. We needed to evacuate the park immediately. As sirens blared and rangers went door to door, urging visitors and staff to leave as quickly as possible, I found myself drawn back to the lake shore. Standing there watching the unnaturally disturbed waters, I felt a presence behind me. Turning, I saw Dr. Reeves, her face pale but determined. "You're going down there, aren't you?" she asked, though it wasn't really a question. I nodded, my throat tight. "I have to. Whatever this thing is, it's connected to me now. I can feel it." She held out a hand, and I saw that she was holding a small, sleek device. "It's a specialized underwater camera," she explained, "waterproof to extreme depths and equipped with low-light imaging. If you're really going to do this, at least let us see what you find." As I took the camera, our eyes met. In that moment, I saw that she understood, not just the danger, but the irresistible pull of the unknown. She squeezed my hand briefly, then turned and walked away without another word. I made my way to the boat dock, commandeering a small motorboat. The lake, usually so still and peaceful, was now a maelstrom of churning water and eerie lights. As I guided the boat towards the center of the lake, I could feel a vibration through the hull, a deep subsonic rumble that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth. When I reached what I judged to be the deepest part of the lake, I cut the engine. The silence that followed was oppressive, broken only by the lapping of waves against the boat and the distant, muffled sounds of the evacuation on shore. With trembling hands, I attached the camera to my belt and checked my scuba gear one last time. I knew what I was about to do was madness, a likely death sentence, but I also knew with a certainty that defied explanation that I had no choice. Taking a deep breath, I plunged into the icy waters of Crater Lake. The descent was like entering another world. The waters of Crater Lake, usually crystal clear, were now murky and filled with swirling patterns of bioluminescence. As I sank deeper, the light from the surface faded, replaced by an eerie, pulsating glow that seemed to emanate from the lake itself. The pressure increased as I descended, my ears popping painfully despite the equalization techniques I'd learned in my basic scuba training. But it wasn't just the physical pressure that was affecting me. There was something else, a psychic weight that grew heavier with every foot I dropped. Images flashed through my mind. fragmented visions of ancient forests, of vast cities built by inhuman hands, of cosmic vastness that made me feel infinitesimally small. I realized with a start that these weren't hallucinations. They were memories, but not my own. As I approached the bottom of the lake, the terrain began to change. The smooth volcanic rock gave way to strange organic structures. Massive coral-like growths twisted upwards, their surfaces pulsing with an inner light. Between them, I could see movement shapes that defied description, fluid and ever-changing. And then I saw it. Rising from the lake bed was a structure that dwarfed everything around it. It was like a temple, but built on a scale that boggled the mind. Its architecture was alien, all non-Euclidean angles and impossible geometries that hurt to look at directly. As I approached, drawn by an irresistible force, I saw that the surface of the structure was covered in intricate carvings. They depicted scenes of cosmic horror, vast tentacled entities descending from the stars, reshaping entire worlds to their will. And with a shock of recognition, I realized that some of the carvings matched exactly the visions I'd experienced when touching the wooden figurine. I was so engrossed in the carvings that I almost didn't notice the change in the water around me. It had become thicker, more viscous, and it was moving, swirling around me with purpose. With growing horror, I realized that the water itself was alive, or rather it was part of something alive, something vast beyond comprehension. Panic gripped me and I tried to swim away, but it was like moving through molasses. The living water coiled around my limbs, pulling me towards the temple. As I struggled, my hand brushed against the carved surface of the structure. The moment my skin made contact, my mind exploded with sensation. I was no longer just Ryan Holloway, park ranger. I was everything and nothing, experiencing countless lifetimes in the span of a heartbeat. I saw the birth of stars and the death of galaxies. I witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations on worlds so alien they defied description, and through it all I sensed a presence, ancient beyond imagining, vast beyond comprehension. It was the entity that dwelled within Crater Lake, but it was also so much more. It was a fragment of something even larger, a cosmic being that existed across multiple dimensions and countless worlds. As my consciousness expanded, I began to understand. This entity, this elder god, hadn't just awakened, it had always been awake, always been aware. What we had interpreted as attacks, as violence, was simply the entity trying to communicate in the only way it knew how. The realization hit me like a physical blow. We had been so wrong, so terribly, catastrophically wrong. With the last vestiges of my human will, I activated the camera at my belt, hoping against hope that it was still functioning, still transmitting. The world needed to know the truth, even if I wouldn't be the one to tell it. As my individual consciousness began to dissolve, merging with the vast alien mind of the entity, I had one final, fleeting thought. In our ignorance, in our fear, what had we set in motion? And could anyone hope to stop it now? The darkness closed in, and Ryan Holloway ceased to be. On the shore of Crater Lake, Dr. Samantha Reeves stared in horror at the images flickering across her laptop screen. The camera Ryan wore had continued to transmit long after he should have run out of air, sending back footage that defied explanation. She watched as Ryan's descent turned into something else entirely, as the lake itself seemed to come alive around him. She saw the impossible temple, the carvings that matched no known culture or time period. And she saw the moment when Ryan touched the structure, his body convulsing as if electrified. What followed was a series of images so bizarre, so utterly alien, that Samantha's mind struggled to process them. Flashes of other worlds, of creatures that should not exist, of vast cosmic vistas that no human eye was ever meant to see. And then, abruptly, the transmission cut out. For a long moment, Samantha sat in stunned silence, the implications of what she'd just witnessed slowly sinking in. This was beyond anything she had ever encountered in her years of studying cryptozoology and folklore. This was something else entirely. A low rumble shook the ground, snapping her out of her daze. She looked up to see the surface of the lake churning violently, great waves crashing against the shore. The sky above had turned an unnatural shade of purple, shot through with veins of electric blue. As Samantha watched, paralyzed with a mixture of fear and awe, something began to rise from the center of the lake. At first, it looked like a mountain emerging from the depths. But as it continued to rise, she realized with dawning horror that it was moving, changing, alive. It was vast beyond comprehension, its form constantly shifting and reforming. One moment it was a writhing mass of tentacles, the next a towering insectoid monstrosity. Eyes, hundreds, thousands of them, opened across its surface, each one filled with an intelligence that was utterly inhuman. Samantha felt her sanity begin to fray at the edges as she gazed upon the impossible being. This was what Ryan had discovered. This was what had been sleeping beneath Crater Lake for untold millennia. And now, thanks to their meddling, their ignorant attempts to understand something so far beyond human comprehension, it was awake. Fully, terribly awake. As the entity continued to rise, now towering over the surrounding landscape, Samantha became aware of a presence in her mind. Alien thoughts, vast and incomprehensible, began to flood her consciousness. She understood in that moment that this was no mere creature. This was a god, an elder god, awakened from its slumber and ready to reshape the world in its image. With the last shreds of her human will, Samantha reached for her satellite phone. The world needed to know what was happening here. They needed to be warned, even if there was nothing they could do to stop it. As she dialed, her eyes never leaving the cosmic horror that now dominated the sky, Samantha realized that this was more than just the end of Crater Lake National Park. This was the beginning of a new era for humanity, an era where the veil between our reality and the cosmic horrors beyond had been irrevocably torn. The phone connected, and Samantha began to speak, her voice shaking but determined. "This is Dr. Samantha Reeves reporting from Crater Lake. We have a situation here that defies explanation. I need to speak to someone in authority immediately. The world as we know it is about to change, and we're not ready for what's coming." As she spoke, the entity in the sky turned its gaze upon her. Thousands of alien eyes focused on the small, insignificant human who dared to challenge its awakening. And in that moment, as terror and awe warred within her, Samantha understood that this was only the beginning. The cosmic horror had awakened, and Crater Lake was just the start. What had begun as a routine investigation into strange occurrences in a national park had become the first chapter in humanity's confrontation with the true nature of the universe. A universe far vaster, far stranger, and far more terrifying than we had ever imagined. As the entity began to move, its massive form casting an impossible shadow over the land, Samantha closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer. Not to any god she had known before, but to whatever forces might exist in the universe that could stand against the horror that had awakened in Crater Lake. The cosmic dance had begun, and humanity was woefully unprepared for the music. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as I guided my park ranger truck along the dusty trails of Chiricahua National Monument. It was June 17, 1991, and at 28 years old I thought I'd seen just about everything 5 years as a ranger could throw at me. My name's Kevin Romer, and I was about to discover how wrong I was. The day started like any other, a routine patrol to ensure hikers weren't getting lost or breaking park rules. Honestly, it was mostly an excuse to soak in the raw beauty of the desert landscape. Chiricahua is something else, a maze of cactus-studded ridges and jagged rock formations that can mesmerize you if you're not careful. It's the kind of place where the line between awe and danger blurs easily. As I navigated the winding dirt roads, my radio crackled to life. It was Jenny from Dispatch, her voice tinged with mild concern. "Kevin, we've got reports of unauthorized camping in Sector 7. Can you check it out?" I frowned. Sector 7 was off limits due to unstable ground conditions. We'd had problems with thrill seekers ignoring the warnings before, but it had been quiet for months. "Copy that, Jenny. I'm on my way. Probably just some kids thinking they're invincible." "Be careful out there, Kevin. Something feels off about this one." I brushed off her concern with a chuckle, but as I turned the truck towards Sector 7, an uneasy feeling settled in my gut. The desert seemed unnaturally quiet, the usual chorus of birds and insects conspicuously absent. I tried to shake it off, chalking it up to the midday heat, but the feeling persisted. As I approached the restricted area, the terrain became more rugged. The truck bounced and jolted over the uneven ground, forcing me to slow to a crawl. Finally, I reached a point where I couldn't go any further by vehicle. Grabbing my pack and radio, I set out on foot. The sun was directly overhead now, turning the landscape into a shimmering mirage of heat and dust. Sweat trickled down my back as I pushed through the scrub brush, my eyes scanning for any sign of the reported campers. That's when the smell hit me. If you've ever encountered a dead animal that's been baking in the desert sun for days, you know the stench I'm talking about. It's a thick, cloying odor that seems to coat your nostrils and cling to the back of your throat. But this was different, stronger, more pungent, with an underlying sweetness that made my stomach churn. I've smelled death before. It's an unfortunate part of the job sometimes. But this was on another level entirely. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, to radio for backup, to do anything but continue towards that hellish odor. But duty, and a morbid curiosity I'm not proud of, drove me forward. As I crested a small rise, I saw it, a clearing that had been turned into a campsite, or rather what was left of a campsite. The scene before me was one of utter devastation. 2 tents lay in tatters, shredded as if by enormous claws. A cold fire pit sat in the center, untouched for at least a day or more. Camping gear was strewn about haphazardly, some items bent and twisted beyond recognition. But it was the blood that caught and held my horrified gaze. Dark red stains splattered the ground, smeared across the remnants of the tents, even speckled on the surrounding rocks. It looked like someone, or something, had painted the campsite with gore. My hand shook as I reached for my radio. "Dispatch, this is Romer. I found the campsite in Sector 7. It's bad. Really bad. I need backup and forensics out here immediately." Jenny's voice came back, tight with tension. "Copy that, Kevin. What exactly are we dealing with?" I swallowed hard, my eyes still roaming the nightmarish scene before me. "I'm not sure. There's blood everywhere, but no bodies that I can see. The campsite's been torn apart. It looks like some kind of animal attack, but I've never seen anything like this." "Understood. Stay put, Kevin. Backup's on the way, and be careful. Whatever did this might still be in the area." As I lowered the radio, a chill ran down my spine despite the oppressive heat. Jenny was right. Whatever had wreaked this havoc could still be nearby, and judging by the destruction around me, it was something far more dangerous than any wildlife I'd encountered before. I drew my sidearm, a standard-issue Glock that suddenly felt woefully inadequate. The silence that had seemed eerie before now felt positively malevolent. Every rustle of wind through the scrub brush, every shifting pebble, sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. Keeping my weapon at the ready, I began a cautious circuit of the clearing, looking for any clues as to what had happened here. That's when I saw it, a trail of disturbed earth and blood leading away from the campsite. Every instinct told me to stay put and wait for backup. But if there was even a chance that one of the campers had survived and managed to escape, I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. With a deep breath to steel my nerves, I began to follow the grisly trail. As I moved deeper into the wilderness, leaving the relative safety of the clearing behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and more than once I whirled around, certain I'd caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of my eye. But each time there was nothing there, just rocks, cacti, and the ever-present oppressive heat. Yet the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each step. Whatever had attacked the campsite wasn't gone. It was out there, watching, waiting, and I was walking right into its territory. The trail of blood and disturbed earth led me deeper into one of the most remote areas of Chiricahua National Monument. The terrain grew increasingly treacherous, with narrow paths winding between towering rock formations and deep, shadowy crevices. The late afternoon sun cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to reach out like grasping fingers. I moved as quietly as I could, my senses on high alert. Every snapping twig under my boots, every pebble sent skittering down a slope, sounded thunderous in the unnatural silence that had fallen over the desert. The usual sounds of wildlife, the cry of a hawk, the rustle of a lizard through the underbrush, were conspicuously absent. It was as if the entire ecosystem was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The trail I was following became more erratic, zigging and zagging between rock outcroppings. In some places it disappeared entirely, forcing me to search for subtle signs, a scuff mark here, a broken branch there, to stay on track. Whatever had left this trail was moving with purpose, but also seemed to be struggling. The spacing of the marks was irregular, as if the creature or person was limping or dragging itself along. As I rounded a large boulder, I froze. There, not 20 feet away, was a sight that turned my blood to ice. It was a body, or what was left of one. The remains were so mangled and torn that I couldn't immediately tell if it was male or female. Limbs were twisted at impossible angles, the torso ripped open as if by some monstrous force. The face? I tried not to look at the face, but the image seared itself into my brain, eyes wide with terror, mouth frozen in a silent scream. I've seen my fair share of animal attacks in my years as a ranger, but this was something else entirely. No mountain lion or bear could have done this kind of damage. The body looked like it had been mauled by something with the strength of a grizzly, but the ferocity of a rabid wolverine. Fighting back the urge to vomit, I reached for my radio with trembling hands. "Dispatch, this is Romer. I've found a body. It's bad, really bad. Send everything you've got, and tell them to be careful. Whatever did this, it's not like anything we've dealt with before." Jenny's voice came back, tight with tension. "Copy that, Kevin. Backup is en route. ETA 20 minutes. Kevin, maybe you should fall back and wait for them." I was about to agree when something caught my eye. There, leading away from the grisly scene, was another trail. This one was fresher, the blood still glistening wetly in the fading sunlight. And mixed in with the blood were strange, alien-looking tracks. They were vaguely feline in shape, but far too large, with odd protrusions that looked almost like fingers. "Negative, dispatch," I heard myself say, even as my mind screamed at me to turn back. "There might be another victim out there. I'm going to follow the trail a bit further. I'll be careful, I promise." "Kevin, don't—" Jenny's protest was cut off as I switched off the radio. I couldn't explain it, but something was driving me forward. A mix of duty, curiosity, and a growing irrational need to understand what was happening in my park. As I followed the new trail, the terrain became even more challenging. I found myself squeezing through narrow gaps between towering rock walls, the stone still radiating the day's heat. The shadows grew longer, deeper, as the sun began to dip towards the horizon. Soon I knew the desert night would fall, bringing with it a bone-deep chill and dangers I didn't want to contemplate. I was about to turn back when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the desert, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate the very air around me. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Not quite animal, not quite something else. The sound raised every hair on my body and sent a primal jolt of fear through my system. Instinctively, I ducked behind a large boulder, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it could be heard for miles. Peering cautiously around the rock, I saw movement in a small clearing ahead. At first my mind couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. It was like trying to comprehend a Salvador Dali painting come to life. The creature, and I use that term loosely, was vaguely humanoid in shape, but that's where any resemblance to anything I recognized ended. It stood at least 7 feet tall, its body a twisted mass of sinewy muscle and what looked like chitinous plates. Its limbs were too long, too jointed, ending in hands, if you could call them that, tipped with wicked curved claws. But it was the head that truly defied description. Elongated and eyeless, it ended in a mouth that split open vertically, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. As I watched, frozen in terror, a long whip-like tongue snaked out, tasting the air. The creature moved with a fluid grace that belied its monstrous appearance, circling something on the ground. With a start, I realized it was another body. But this one was moving weakly. Someone was still alive out there. In that moment, I had a choice to make. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away from this nightmare as possible. But I knew I couldn't leave a survivor to face this horror alone. With shaking hands, I raised my Glock and took aim. The sound of the gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. The creature's head snapped up, that eyeless face turning in my direction with terrifying speed. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, with a shriek that would haunt my dreams for years to come, it charged. I fired again and again, the muzzle flashes briefly illuminating the grotesque form bearing down on me. But the bullet seemed to have little effect, merely enraging the beast further. In the span of seconds, it closed the distance between us, moving faster than anything that size had a right to. I dove to the side just as it reached me, feeling the wind of its passage and the sting of its claws as they grazed my arm. I hit the ground hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. Gasping for breath, I rolled, bringing the Glock up for another shot. But the creature was already on me. A clawed hand smashed the gun from my grip, sending it skittering across the rocky ground. Another blow caught me in the chest, lifting me off my feet and slamming me against the canyon wall. Stars exploded in my vision as my head cracked against the stone. Through the haze of pain, I saw the creature looming over me, its mouth opening impossibly wide. The stench of rotting meat washed over me as it leaned in, that nightmare tongue flicking out to taste my fear. This was it, I thought. This was how Kevin Romer, park ranger, was going to die, torn apart by something that shouldn't exist in a godforsaken corner of the Arizona desert. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But it never came. Instead, a new sound split the air, a high, keening wail that set my teeth on edge. The creature reared back, its head swiveling towards the source of the noise. Without warning, it bounded away, disappearing into the gathering darkness with inhuman speed. I lay there for what felt like hours, my body battered, my mind reeling from what I'd just experienced. Eventually, the sound of approaching voices and flashlight beams cut through the fog of pain and fear. Backup had finally arrived. As I was loaded into a waiting ambulance, I caught a glimpse of something that chilled me to my core. There, on a nearby rock face illuminated by the harsh glare of floodlights, was a marking. It looked ancient, weathered by centuries of wind and sand. But its form was unmistakable, a crude representation of the creature I had just encountered. Whatever this thing was, it had been here for a long, long time, and I had a sinking feeling that our troubles were just beginning. The next few days passed in a blur of hospital rooms, police interviews, and sleepless nights plagued by vivid nightmares. My physical injuries were relatively minor, some cuts, bruises, and a mild concussion, but the psychological trauma ran deep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that creature, its eyeless face looming over me, jaws wide and ready to strike. The official investigation into the incident was a joke. Despite the evidence, the mangled bodies, the strange tracks, my own testimony, the authorities seemed determined to write it off as a tragic animal attack. Mountain lion, they said, maybe a particularly aggressive bear. When I tried to describe what I'd seen, the looks I received ranged from pity to outright disbelief. "Listen, Romer," Sheriff Dawson said, his voice a mixture of concern and condescension. "I know you've been through a hell of an ordeal, but what you're describing, it's impossible. There's no such thing as monsters." I wanted to scream at him, to make him understand that what I'd encountered was very real and very dangerous. But I bit my tongue. I was already being looked at like I was one bad day away from a padded room. Pushing the issue would only make things worse. Instead, I focused on the one person who seemed to take me seriously, Dr. Elena Valdez, a cryptozoologist who had somehow caught wind of the incident and managed to wrangle her way into the investigation. She listened to my story without judgment, her dark eyes intense as she took copious notes. "What you're describing, Mr. Romer," she said, after I'd finished recounting my experience for what felt like the 100th time, bears some similarities to creatures from Native American folklore. The Tohono O'odham people, who have lived in this region for centuries, have stories of shape-shifting beings that dwell in remote areas. They're said to be ancient, powerful, and incredibly dangerous. I latched onto her words like a drowning man grasping at a lifeline. "So you believe me? You think this thing is real?" Dr. Valdez's expression was guarded. "I believe that you encountered something unusual, something that defies conventional explanation. Whether it's truly a creature of legend or something else entirely, I can't say. But I intend to find out." Her determination should have been reassuring, but instead it sent a chill down my spine. The memory of that thing's strength, its speed, its utter alienness was still too fresh. "Be careful," I warned her. "This isn't some Bigfoot or Loch Ness monster. It's real, and it's lethal." She nodded solemnly. I understand the risks, Mr. Romer, but if this creature is out there, we need to know more about it, for the safety of everyone in the area. I couldn't argue with her logic, but a nagging feeling in my gut told me that pursuing this thing would only lead to more tragedy. Still, I gave Dr. Valdez all the information I could, including the location of the strange marking I had seen on the rock face. As the days turned into weeks, life in the small town near Chiricahua National Monument tried to return to normal. The park remained closed for routine maintenance, a flimsy excuse that fooled no one. Rumors flew thick and fast, each wilder than the last. Some said it was a government experiment gone wrong, others claimed it was aliens. A few even suggested it was some kind of demon drawn to the area by ancient Native American rituals. I tried to put it all behind me, to forget what I'd seen and move on with my life. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The nightmares continued, becoming more vivid and terrifying with each passing night. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the echoes of that inhuman shriek ringing in my ears. It was about a month after the incident when Dr. Valdez showed up at my door, her face pale and drawn. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into my small apartment. "I've found something." She spread a collection of papers and photographs across my coffee table. Most were copies of old documents, their edges yellowed with age. But it was the photos that caught my attention. They showed cave paintings, ancient and weathered, depicting a creature that was hauntingly familiar. "These were discovered in a remote cave system about 50 miles from where you had your encounter," Dr. Valdez explained, her voice tight with excitement and fear. "They're at least 1,000 years old, possibly much older. And look at this." She pointed to a series of symbols next to one of the creature depictions. "These match the marking you saw on the rock face. It's some kind of written language, unlike anything I've ever seen before." I stared at the images, a cold dread settling in the pit of my stomach. "What does it mean?" Dr. Valdez shook her head. "I don't know, but I've been talking to some of the local tribal elders. They have stories, passed down through generations, of a time when these creatures walked the earth openly. They call them the Skin Stealers." Skin Stealers? The name sent a shiver down my spine. According to the legends, they could take on the appearance of their victims, wearing their skins like disguises. They were said to be nearly immortal, vulnerable only to very specific rituals and weapons. I thought back to the creature I'd encountered, its bizarre, almost patchwork appearance. But the thing I saw, it didn't look human at all. Dr. Valdez's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of fascination and fear. "The elders say that over time, as belief in the old ways faded, the Skin Stealers began to lose their ability to perfectly mimic humans. They became twisted, monstrous versions of what they once were. But they're still out there, still hunting." I sat back, my mind reeling. "So what do we do?" "We need to go back out there," Dr. Valdez said, her voice filled with determination. "We need to find more evidence, maybe even track this thing to its lair. If we can prove its existence, we can get the help we need to stop it." Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to tell her she was crazy and show her the door. But deep down I knew she was right. Whatever this thing was, it was still out there. And if the legends were true, it would keep killing, keep hunting, unless someone stopped it. "When do we leave?" I heard myself ask, even as a part of me wondered if I was signing my own death warrant. Dr. Valdez's relief was palpable. "Tomorrow at dawn. I've got equipment, supplies, everything we'll need for an extended expedition. Are you sure you're up for this?" I nodded, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. Someone has to stop this thing. Might as well be us. As Dr. Valdez left to make final preparations, I found myself staring out the window at the distant silhouette of the Chiricahua Mountains. Somewhere out there, a monster was waiting, a creature of myth and nightmare made flesh. Tomorrow we would venture into its domain, armed with little more than curiosity and desperation. As the sun set, painting the desert in shades of blood red, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were embarking on a journey from which there might be no return. The pre-dawn air was crisp and cool as Dr. Valdez and I loaded the last of our gear into her rugged 4x4. The sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, the stars fading as the first hints of sunlight crept over the horizon. It would be scorching hot in a few hours, but for now the desert was peaceful, almost beautiful. We'd spent the night going over maps, checking equipment, and discussing strategy. Dr. Valdez had brought an impressive array of scientific instruments, cameras with night vision capabilities, audio recorders, even a device she claimed could detect unusual electromagnetic frequencies. I'd opted for more practical gear, extra water, first aid supplies, and a high-powered rifle I'd borrowed from a friend. The Glock was holstered at my hip, a comforting weight despite its proven ineffectiveness against our quarry. As we set out, following rough jeep trails into the more remote areas of the park, an uneasy silence fell between us. The magnitude of what we were attempting, tracking a creature that by all rights shouldn't exist, weighed heavily on both our minds. "You know," Dr. Valdez said as we bounced along a particularly rough stretch of trail, "in all my years of studying cryptozoology, I never actually expected to find anything. Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, they were always just stories, legends to be studied but never truly believed." I glanced over at her, noting the mix of excitement and fear in her eyes. "And now?" She shook her head, a rueful smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Now I'm not sure what to believe. If this creature is real, if it's truly what the legends say it is, it changes everything. Our understanding of history, of evolution, of what's possible in this world." I thought back to my encounter, to the sheer alienness of the creature I'd seen. "Trust me, Doc, some things are better left as legends." We lapsed back into silence as the terrain grew more challenging. Eventually, we were forced to abandon the vehicle and continue on foot. The sun was high in the sky now, beating down mercilessly as we trudged through the rugged landscape. Despite the heat, I felt a constant chill, as if icy fingers were trailing down my spine. We'd been hiking for several hours, following the general direction of my previous encounter, when Dr. Valdez called for a break. As we sat in the meager shade of a large boulder, sipping water and catching our breath, she pulled out a small device that looked like a cross between a cell phone and a Geiger counter. "I've been monitoring electromagnetic anomalies," she explained, fiddling with the controls. "There's been a low-level disturbance all day, but it's getting stronger. We might be getting close to something." As if on cue, a sound echoed through the canyon, a high, keening wail that set my teeth on edge. It was the same sound I'd heard just before the creature had fled during our last encounter. Dr. Valdez's eyes widened. "Was that—" "Yeah," I cut her off, already on my feet, rifle at the ready. "That was it. We need to move. Now." We quickened our pace, following the increasingly urgent beeping of Dr. Valdez's device. The sound came again, closer this time, sending a jolt of adrenaline through my system. Every shadow, every rustle of wind through the scrub brush, seemed to hide potential danger. As we rounded a bend in the narrow canyon, we came upon a sight that stopped us dead in our tracks. There, carved into the sheer rock face, was an entrance. Not a natural cave, but something clearly artificial. Intricate symbols, similar to the ones we'd seen in the ancient cave paintings, surrounded the opening. "My God," Dr. Valdez breathed, her voice a mixture of awe and trepidation. "This is it. This has to be where it lives." I raised my rifle, every muscle tense. Or where it takes its victims. The entrance loomed before us, a gaping maw of darkness that seemed to swallow all light. The air coming from within was cool and damp, carrying with it a faint, musty odor that reminded me uncomfortably of the creature's breath. Dr. Valdez fumbled with her pack, pulling out powerful flashlights for both of us. "We have to go in," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We might never get another chance like this." Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to get as far away from this place as possible. But I knew she was right. Whatever answers we sought, whatever hope we had of stopping this thing, lay within the depths of that cave. With a deep breath to steel my nerves, I nodded. "Stay behind me, and if I say run, you run. No questions, no hesitation. Got it?" Dr. Valdez nodded solemnly. Together we stepped into the darkness, the beam of our flashlights seeming pitifully inadequate against the oppressive gloom. The passage sloped downward, the air growing colder and damper with each step. The walls were smooth, almost polished, covered in more of those strange symbols. Dr. Valdez paused occasionally to take photos or readings, but I kept us moving, acutely aware of the potential danger lurking in every shadow. We had been descending for what felt like hours when the passage suddenly opened up into a vast chamber. Our flashlights couldn't penetrate to the far walls or ceiling, giving the impression of an endless void. But what we could see turned my blood to ice. The floor of the chamber was littered with bones, hundreds, maybe thousands of skeletons, some ancient and yellowed with age, others disturbingly fresh. And they weren't all human. Mixed in were the remains of creatures I couldn't identify. Things with too many limbs, skulls that were decidedly not of this earth. But it was what lay at the center of the chamber that truly defied comprehension. A pool of liquid, black as night and perfectly still, reflected our flashlight beams like a dark mirror. And rising from its center was a structure that hurt to look at directly. It twisted and curved in ways that seemed to defy the laws of physics, its surface constantly shifting and changing. As we stood there, frozen in awe and terror, a sound echoed through the chamber, that same high, keening wail we'd heard before. But this time, it was answered. From the depths of the pool, from the shadows at the edges of our vision, came a chorus of inhuman voices. We weren't alone. And whatever was in here with us, it knew we had arrived. The cacophony of alien wails reverberated through the chamber, growing louder and more frenzied with each passing second. I grabbed Dr. Valdez's arm, already backing towards the entrance. We need to leave, now, but before we could make our escape, movement caught my eye. The surface of the black pool began to ripple and churn. Something was emerging. At first it looked like a hand reaching up from the depths. But as more of it breached the surface, I realized with mounting horror that it was nothing so mundane. It was a writhing mass of tentacles, each one easily as thick as my torso, covered in pulsating iridescent patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Oh my God," Dr. Valdez whispered, her voice barely audible over the continuing wails. It's beautiful." I tore my gaze away from the emerging monstrosity to look at her. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, a thin trickle of blood running from her nose. The hand holding her camera was shaking violently, but she made no move to flee. "Elena," I shouted, shaking her roughly. "We have to go." She blinked, seeming to come back to herself. "What? Oh no." The thing in the pool was still rising, more and more of its impossible bulk becoming visible. It towered over us now, a shape that defied description, constantly shifting and reforming. Where I had expected to see a face, or at least eyes, there was only a swirling vortex of darkness. And then it spoke, not with words, not with any sound at all. But suddenly, horribly, its thoughts were in my head. Asterisk intruders, witness, become. The force of it drove me to my knees. Images flooded my mind, vast cosmic vistas, worlds beyond imagination, creatures that dwarfed galaxies. I saw the birth and death of universes, the grand cycle of creation and destruction playing out on a scale I couldn't comprehend. And through it all, I sensed an ancient, alien intelligence. This thing, this entity, wasn't just old. It was timeless, eternal. It had seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations, had walked the earth when our ancestors were still single-celled organisms floating in primordial seas. I became aware of Dr. Valdez screaming, the sound seeming to come from very far away. With tremendous effort, I tore my gaze away from the entity and saw her on the ground, clutching her head, blood now flowing freely from her nose and ears. The strength of will it took to move was monumental, but somehow I managed to crawl to her side. "Elena," I gasped, my own head feeling like it was about to split open. "We have to get out of here." She looked at me, her eyes wild and unfocused. "Don't you see?" she babbled. "It's showing us everything, the truth about our world, about the universe." "We're so small, Kevin, so insignificant." I grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at me. "Stay with me, Doc. This thing, whatever it is, it's not here to enlighten us. It's going to kill us if we don't move." As if in response to my words, a new sound cut through the chaos. A wet, slithering noise that turned my stomach. I looked back towards the pool and immediately wished I hadn't. The smaller creatures I'd encountered before, the ones I'd started thinking of as the entity's servants or offspring, were emerging from the shadows. Dozens of them, their eyeless faces turned towards us, mouths opening to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. With strength born of desperation, I hauled Dr. Valdez to her feet. "Run!" I shouted, giving her a push towards the entrance. She stumbled forward, seeming to finally grasp the danger we were in. We ran. Behind us, I could hear the slap of inhuman feet on stone, the scrape of claws, the hissing and shrieking of our pursuers. The narrow passageway that had taken us hours to descend now became a nightmarish gauntlet. I fired blindly behind us as we ran, the muzzle flashes briefly illuminating twisted, monstrous forms. The bullets seemed to have little effect, but the noise and light at least seemed to slow them down. Just when I thought my lungs would burst, just when I was certain we couldn't outrun the horrors behind us for another second, I saw light ahead, the entrance to the cave. We burst out into the harsh sunlight of the desert, the sudden brightness momentarily blinding after the darkness of the cave. But we didn't stop. We couldn't stop. We ran until our legs gave out, collapsing in the shelter of a large rock formation. For long minutes we lay there, gasping for breath, listening for any sign of pursuit. But there was nothing. No inhuman shrieks, no slithering sounds. Just the wind whistling through the rocks and our own ragged breathing. As the adrenaline began to fade, the full weight of what we'd experienced settled over us like a shroud. Dr. Valdez began to sob quietly, her body shaking. I wasn't in much better shape, my mind reeling from the cosmic horrors we'd glimpsed. "What?" I finally managed to gasp out. "What the hell was that thing?" Dr. Valdez shook her head, her eyes haunted. "I don't know, I don't think human languages have words for what that was. An alien god? A being from another dimension? Does it even matter?" I thought back to the images that had flooded my mind, the sense of vast, incomprehensible age and power. "No," I said quietly, "I guess it doesn't." As the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of red and gold, we sat in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. We had sought answers, had wanted to uncover the truth behind the legends and the attacks. Now I wasn't sure if knowing the truth was better than the mystery we'd started with. We had glimpsed something beyond human comprehension, a reality so vast and alien that it threatened to shatter our understanding of the world. As darkness fell, we made our way back to Dr. Valdez's vehicle, moving slowly and carefully, jumping at every shadow. The drive back to town was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts, trying to process what we'd experienced. It wasn't until we reached the outskirts of town that Dr. Valdez spoke. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head, at a loss. "I don't know. Who would believe us? And even if they did, what could anyone do against that?" She nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Maybe it's better if we don't say anything. At least not everything. We can report the cave, the symbols. But the rest stays with us," I finished for her. The thought of keeping quiet about what we'd seen didn't sit well with me, but I knew she was right. The truth would do more harm than good. The days that followed our expedition were a blur of debriefings, medical examinations, and sleepless nights. We stuck to our agreed-upon story. We'd found a cave with strange markings, possibly of archaeological significance, but had been forced to flee due to unstable conditions inside. We mentioned nothing of the entity in the pool, the cosmic visions, or the horde of creatures that had pursued us. The authorities seemed eager to accept our sanitized version of events. The cave was quickly cordoned off, with official statements citing concerns about structural instability and the need for further study. I couldn't help but wonder if someone, somewhere, knew more than they were letting on. Dr. Valdez threw herself into studying the photos and data we'd managed to collect before our hasty retreat. She spent hours poring over the images of the symbols, consulting with linguists and anthropologists, trying to decipher their meaning. I, on the other hand, found myself struggling to readjust to normal life. The mundane tasks of day-to-day existence seemed hollow, meaningless in the face of what I'd witnessed. How could I worry about paying bills or mowing the lawn when I knew that just miles away, an entity of unimaginable power slumbered beneath the earth? The nightmares, when they came, were vivid and terrifying. I would find myself back in that chamber, facing the rising horror from the pool. But in my dreams, there was no escape. I would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, the echoes of alien thoughts still reverberating through my mind. About a week after our return, Dr. Valdez called me, her voice tight with excitement. "I found something," she said. "Can you come over?" When I arrived at her small apartment, I found every surface covered in papers, books, and printouts. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her eyes bright with a feverish intensity. "Look at this," she said, thrusting a stack of papers into my hands. "I've been comparing the symbols we found to known ancient scripts. There are similarities, hints of Sumerian cuneiform, elements of Proto-Elamite, but it's like nothing that's ever been documented." I flipped through the pages, my eyes glazing over at the complex diagrams and dense text. "What does it mean?" Dr. Valdez's expression grew serious. "I'm not sure, but based on what I've been able to decipher, I think those creatures, the ones we saw in the cave, they're not the real threat." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" "They're guardians," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Protectors. They're there to keep something in, not out." The implications of her words hit me like a physical blow. If those nightmarish creatures were merely guardians, what could they possibly be containing? The entity in the pool, or something even worse? As if reading my thoughts, Dr. Valdez continued. "The entity we saw, the one in the pool, I don't think it's fully awake yet. The symbols speak of a great awakening, a time when the sleeper shall rise, and the veil between worlds shall be torn asunder." I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly weak. "So what do we do?" Dr. Valdez shook her head, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. "I don't know, but we can't just sit back and do nothing. If this thing fully awakens, if it breaks free, I don't think our world would survive." As we sat there, surrounded by the fruits of Dr. Valdez's research, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were in way over our heads. We were two people, a park ranger and a cryptozoologist, facing a threat of cosmic proportions. What chance did we have? But as I looked at Dr. Valdez, saw the resolve in her eyes, I knew we had to try. Whatever the cost, whatever the danger, we couldn't let that thing awaken fully. The fate of our world, perhaps of reality itself, might depend on it. "Okay," I said, straightening up. "Where do we start?" Dr. Valdez smiled grimly. "We need to go back. There's more in those caves, more symbols to decipher, and we need to find a way to strengthen whatever's keeping that thing contained." The thought of returning to that place of nightmare sent a shudder through me, but I nodded. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow," she said, "at first light. And Kevin, thank you, I couldn't do this alone." As I left her apartment, the weight of our task settling heavily on my shoulders, I couldn't help but wonder, were we embarking on a noble quest to save the world, or were we merely hastening our own doom? Only time would tell. The pre-dawn air was crisp and cool as Dr. Valdez and I loaded our gear into her 4x4. This time, we were better prepared. In addition to the scientific equipment and weapons, we carried ancient texts, copies of the symbols we'd found, and talismans borrowed from local tribal elders who, after much persuasion, had shared some of their ancestral knowledge. The drive to the cave entrance was tense, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The horrors we'd witnessed on our last expedition were still fresh in our minds, but the urgency of our mission drove us forward. As we approached the cave, I noticed something odd. The official barriers and warning signs that had been erected after our initial report were gone. In their place was nothing. No signs of human presence at all. "This isn't right," I muttered, hand moving to my holstered weapon. "There should be guards, researchers, something." Dr. Valdez nodded grimly. "I have a bad feeling about this." We cautiously approached the cave entrance, every sense on high alert. The symbols carved around the opening seemed to shimmer in the early morning light, almost as if they were alive. With a deep breath to steel our nerves, we switched on our flashlights and entered the cave. The descent seemed easier this time, the passage less steep and winding than I remembered. But that only added to my unease. It was as if the cave itself was inviting us in, eager for our return. As we reached the vast chamber where we'd encountered the entity, we froze in shock. The room had changed. The pool at the center was larger, its surface rippling with unseen currents. The bizarre structure rising from its depths had grown, its twisted form now nearly touching the ceiling of the cavern. But most disturbing of all were the new additions to the chamber. Crude altars had been erected around the pool, their surfaces stained dark with what I hoped wasn't blood. And there, tending to these altars, were people. Ordinary-looking people in ordinary clothes, their movements jerky and unnatural, their eyes blank and unfocused. "My God," Dr. Valdez whispered, "they're in some kind of trance." As if hearing her words, the figures turned towards us. Their faces split into unnatural grins, revealing mouths full of sharpened teeth. And then they attacked. What followed was a nightmare of violence and horror. These weren't the inhuman creatures we'd faced before, but they were no less dangerous. They fought with inhuman strength and a complete disregard for their own safety. I fired my weapon, the sound deafening in the enclosed space, but for every attacker that fell, 2 more seemed to take their place. Dr. Valdez fought beside me, wielding a makeshift flamethrower she'd constructed from a pressurized canister and a lighter. Just when it seemed we would be overwhelmed, a new sound cut through the chaos. A deep, resonant chant that seemed to come from the very walls of the cavern. The attackers froze, their faces contorting in pain before collapsing to the ground. From the shadows emerged a group of figures in elaborate robes, their faces hidden behind intricately carved masks. One of them stepped forward, raising a gnarled staff. "You should not have returned," a voice rasped from behind the mask. "You have no idea what forces you are meddling with." Dr. Valdez stepped forward, her voice shaking but determined. "We know more than you think. The sleeper, the great awakening. We've translated part of the symbols." The masked figure tilted its head, considering. "Perhaps you are not as ignorant as we feared, but your presence here has accelerated the awakening. The barriers between worlds grow thin." As if in response to his words, a tremor ran through the cavern. The surface of the pool began to churn, and a familiar alien pressure began to build in my mind. "It's happening," I gasped. "It's waking up." The masked figures began to chant again, their voices rising in an otherworldly harmony. The pressure in my head intensified, and I saw Dr. Valdez stumble, blood trickling from her nose. "We must act now," the lead figure said, turning to us. "The ritual to reinforce the barriers requires a sacrifice, a willing offering of life force." I looked at Dr. Valdez, saw the resolve in her eyes, and knew what I had to do. "I'll do it," I said, stepping forward. "Just tell me what I need to do." The masked figure nodded solemnly. "Your courage honors you. Step into the pool, embrace the void. Your life force will strengthen the barriers, buying us more time." As I moved towards the roiling black liquid, Dr. Valdez grabbed my arm. "Kevin, no, there has to be another way." I smiled sadly at her. "You know there isn't. Someone has to do this, and your knowledge is too valuable. You need to continue the research, find a permanent solution." Tears streaming down her face, she nodded. "I'll find a way to end this, I promise." With a final nod to her, I turned and stepped into the pool. The liquid was cold, so cold it burned. As I sank deeper, I felt something vast and alien brush against my mind. For a moment I glimpsed the true nature of the entity we were fighting against, and my sanity nearly shattered. But then the chanting grew louder, and I felt my life force being drawn out, used to reinforce the barriers between worlds. As consciousness faded, my last thought was a hope that my sacrifice would be enough, that it would buy humanity the time it needed to find a way to stop this cosmic horror once and for all. Dr. Elena Valdez stood at the edge of Crater Lake, her eyes fixed on the placid blue waters that hid so many secrets. It had been 5 years since that fateful day in the cave, 5 years since Kevin Romer had sacrificed himself to keep an unimaginable horror at bay. In that time, she had dedicated every waking moment to unraveling the mystery of the entity, to finding a permanent solution to the threat it posed. Her research had taken her to the far corners of the globe, delving into ancient texts and forgotten lore. She had made progress, slowly but surely. The symbols were yielding their secrets, revealing a history far older and stranger than anyone had imagined. But the work was far from over. As she stood there, lost in thought, a park ranger approached. "Dr. Valdez, we're ready to begin the survey." She nodded, turning away from the lake. The young ranger looked nervous, his eyes darting around as if expecting something to leap out at him at any moment. Elena couldn't blame him. Those who knew the truth about what lay beneath Crater Lake rarely slept easy. "Let's get started then," she said, forcing a smile. "We have a lot of ground to cover." As they walked towards the waiting research team, Elena cast one last glance at the lake. Somewhere down there in the cold, dark depths, an ancient evil slumbered. And somewhere in that same darkness was Kevin, his sacrifice buying them precious time. She silently renewed her vow to find a way to end this threat once and for all. For Kevin, for all those who had fallen victim to the entity, and for the future of humanity itself. The battle was far from over. But as long as there were those willing to stand against the darkness, there was hope. And in the face of cosmic horror, sometimes hope was all you had. In 1996, I was working the eastern edge of the Great Smoky Mountains. My name's Samuel Hawkins, and for the last decade, I had been bouncing between ranger gigs across the Appalachian region. Not the career path I envisioned when I was studying environmental science back in college. But hey, I figured dealing with wild animals was easier than battling corporate bureaucracy in some stuffy office. I've been called a lot of things: quiet, stubborn, too blunt for my own good, but most folks say I'm likable enough. Even the tourists who I have to guide back after they've wandered off trail tend to laugh when I tell them to buy a map next time. It's all part of the job, I suppose. That fateful year, I was 34 years old, with a decade of ranger experience under my belt. I'd seen my fair share of strange things in the wilderness, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to unfold. The Smokies had always been a place of mystery, with its misty peaks and deep shadowy valleys, but the secrets it held were far darker than I could have imagined. My patrol that day started like any other. It was a crisp Monday morning in late September, the air carrying the first hints of autumn. The leaves were just beginning to turn, splashes of gold and red peeking through the sea of green. I had a section of the park where hikers were notorious for going missing. Not that they were being snatched up by something, mind you, but because most of them thought GPS was a replacement for common sense. People underestimate the Smokies, figuring a well-traveled park couldn't possibly be dangerous. They're wrong, dead wrong, as I was about to find out. That morning I had the pleasure of escorting a family of 4 back to the main trailhead after they had gotten themselves turned around. Nice folks from Ohio, I think. The Johnsons, Mark and Linda, with their kids, Tommy and Anna. They were your typical city dwellers, woefully unprepared for the realities of the wilderness. Mark had insisted they could find their way back using his fancy new GPS device, but technology has a funny way of failing when you need it most. As I guided them back, I couldn't shake this nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. Something felt off, like the forest was holding its breath. I chalked it up to the changing seasons, but looking back, I wonder if it was some kind of warning. After the Johnsons were back on track, I radioed in and continued my route. Nothing to see here, just trees, the distant call of a hawk, and the occasional squirrel acting like it owned the woods. But that feeling, that sense of unease, it stuck with me like a bad penny. Little did I know it was just the beginning of a nightmare that would change my life forever. Around noon I reached an area near Gregory Bald, a spot known for its open views and calm breezes. It was one of my favorite spots to grab a sandwich and pretend I had the best job in the world. The vista was breathtaking, rolling hills covered in a patchwork of green, gold, and crimson, stretching as far as the eye could see. But something felt off. You ever get that sense when the forest just goes quiet, like nature holds its breath, waiting for something to happen? That was the vibe. At first I chalked it up to a bear, maybe a big one lumbering through the underbrush, which would explain why the birds shut up all at once. But when I listened closer, there wasn't even the crack of a twig. Nothing. The silence was oppressive, pressing down on me like a physical weight. I've spent enough time in these woods to know that silence like this isn't natural. It's the kind of quiet that comes before a storm, or worse. So I did what any rational person would do. I took another bite of my sandwich and figured whatever it was would pass. After all, bears don't care much for turkey and cheddar, so I wasn't exactly on the menu. But as I sat there trying to convince myself everything was fine, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. My eyes scanned the tree line, searching for any sign of movement. The forest seemed frozen like a photograph. Not a leaf stirred, not a branch swayed. It was as if time itself had stopped, leaving me trapped in this moment of unnatural stillness. That's when I saw it, a shadow moving between the trees, big, too big for a bear. It moved fast, almost like it was skimming just above the ground. My stomach dropped, but I didn't move right away. Years of training and experience had taught me that sudden movements could provoke an animal, turn a curious encounter into a dangerous one. But this didn't feel like any animal I'd ever encountered. The way it moved, the sheer size of it, it defied explanation. I stood up slowly, scanning the tree line, and reached for my radio. Now here's the thing about radios in the Smokies, they're garbage half the time. And today was no exception, just static, like the thing was mocking me for even trying. The movement stopped, and for a moment I thought maybe I was just tired, my brain playing tricks on me. I mean, it happens. You stare at enough trees and suddenly you're seeing faces in the bark. But deep down I knew this was different. This was real, and it was dangerous. As I started to turn back to the trail, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps. But not the heavy plod of a bear or the lighter tap of a deer. No, this was different. These steps were slow, deliberate, like something was stalking, and they were getting closer. I started backing up, my hand resting on the holster of my sidearm, though I hadn't drawn it yet. You don't go pointing guns at every shadow, not in my line of work. That's a fast way to lose a job and get your face on the evening news. But every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to get as far away from this thing as possible. Then it came into view. Sort of. The thing stepped from behind a thick tree, and I felt my reality shatter. It was hunched, long-limbed, with a body covered in patches of what looked like fur but was too uneven, almost mangy. Its legs were bent in a way that reminded me of a wolf, but it moved on 2 feet like a person. Only its gait was jerky, unnatural, like a marionette being controlled by a drunk puppeteer. I know wolves, bears, even the occasional mountain lion when they wander this far east, but this was none of those. This was something that shouldn't exist, something that defied every law of nature I knew. I froze, every instinct in me screaming to do the opposite, but instead I stood there, rooted to the spot, watching as it shifted its head, sniffing the air. Its nose, if you could call it that, looked like something that had been mashed up and spread too wide across its face, like someone had taken parts from different animals and stuck them together in a grotesque patchwork. Its eyes, though, God, its eyes. They were too intelligent, too aware. They scanned the clearing, and when they locked onto me, I saw something I never expected to see in an animal's eyes. Recognition. Not just of me as prey, but of me as a person. It knew what I was, and it didn't care. I don't scare easy. That's part of the job. But this was different. This thing wasn't supposed to exist. And yet here it was, a patchwork nightmare, casually walking through the Smokies like it owned the place. Before I could even reach for my gun, it bolted, straight at me. Now I've had wild animals charge before, but they usually stop once they realize you're human, not lunch. This thing, it didn't stop. And that's when it hit me. It wasn't hunting. It was killing for sport. I barely had time to pull my weapon before it was on me, its massive arm sweeping toward my head. I ducked just in time, stumbling backward into the dirt. My back hit a tree, knocking the wind out of me. I raised my gun, finger on the trigger, but hesitated. One part of my brain was still trying to process what I was looking at, still clinging to the hope that this was all some bizarre hallucination. It didn't give me time to think. Its next swipe caught the edge of my vest, sending me sprawling to the ground. That's when I noticed the blood, not mine, on its claws. I couldn't place the smell at first, but then it hit me, the metallic tang of human blood. Someone had already met this thing today, and they hadn't fared so well. The realization jolted me back to reality. This wasn't a dream, wasn't a hallucination. This was happening, and if I didn't act fast, I was going to end up as another mysterious disappearance in the Smoky Mountains. I fired twice, the shots echoing through the trees, but the thing barely flinched. It was like shooting at a moving tank, the bullets just grazing its skin, leaving dark patches of fur singed, but no real damage. That's when I realized I was in real trouble. My standard issue sidearm, which had always seemed more than enough for any situation I might encounter in the park, was about as effective as a pea shooter against this monstrosity. Desperate, I rolled to the side, using the tree for cover as it lunged again. Its claws raked across the bark, leaving deep gouges in the wood. If that had been me, I didn't want to think about it. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in short gasps. The radio was still crackling uselessly in my pocket, and my mind raced for a plan. I don't know what came over me, but instead of running, I stood my ground. Maybe it was stupidity, maybe it was adrenaline, or maybe I was just too pissed off to care. I aimed my gun again, this time going for the legs. It roared, or at least made a noise that sounded like roaring mixed with nails on a chalkboard, and dropped to one knee, its jerky movements faltering for the first time. I took the chance and ran, sprinting down the slope toward the trailhead. The thing was behind me. I could hear it crashing through the brush, gaining ground with each passing second. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but I kept going, moving purely out of survival instinct. As I ran, my mind raced. What was this thing? Where did it come from? And most importantly, how the hell was I going to stop it? I had seen what bullets did, or rather didn't do. I needed something more, something bigger. Then I remembered. There was an old ranger station about a quarter-mile ahead. If I could make it there, I might have a chance. The station was stocked with emergency supplies, including a high-powered rifle meant for dealing with aggressive bears. It wasn't much, but it was the only plan I had. I veered off the main trail, taking a shortcut through dense underbrush. Branches whipped at my face, and roots seemed to reach up to trip me. But I kept going. The creature was still behind me, its unnatural gait allowing it to navigate the difficult terrain with unsettling ease. Just when I thought my legs would give out, I saw it, the weathered wooden structure of the ranger station. I put on a final burst of speed, practically throwing myself at the door. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, acutely aware of the crashing sounds getting closer and closer. Finally, the lock turned. I yanked the door open and dove inside, slamming it shut behind me. For a moment, all I could do was lean against the door, gasping for breath, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. But I knew I didn't have time to rest. I could hear the creature outside, circling the station, looking for a way in. I moved quickly, locating the gun safe and punching in the code with trembling fingers. The rifle was there, along with a box of ammunition. I loaded it as fast as I could, my ranger training kicking in despite the fear clouding my mind. Just as I finished, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, the splintering of wood. I turned to see a massive, clawed hand punching through the door. It was only a matter of seconds before the creature would be inside. I raised the rifle, aiming at the door. This was it, me or the monster. As the door began to give way, I took a deep breath, steadied my aim, and prepared for the fight of my life. The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters, and the creature burst through. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. I could see every detail of the monstrosity, its matted fur, its twisted limbs, those terrifyingly intelligent eyes. And in those eyes I saw something I never expected. Hunger, yes, but also curiosity. I didn't have time to ponder it. My finger squeezed the trigger and the rifle roared to life. The creature staggered back, actually affected by the larger caliber rounds. But it wasn't enough. It shook off the impact and lunged at me again. I fired again and again, each shot punctuated by the creature's inhuman shrieks. The inside of the station became a war zone, furniture splintering, papers flying, the air thick with gun smoke and the metallic scent of blood, both mine and the creature's. In the chaos, I noticed something bizarre. Where my shots landed, the creature's flesh seemed to shift. It was like watching a video of healing sped up 1,000 times, but it wasn't just healing. The wounds were changing, adapting. Each time I hit it, the next shot to the same area did less damage. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the creature fell. It collapsed to the floor with a thud that shook the entire station. I stood there, rifle still raised, waiting for it to move again, but it didn't. Cautiously, I approached. The creature lay still, its chest rising and falling with labored breaths. Up close, it was even more horrifying. Its body was a patchwork of different textures, fur, scales, even what looked like tree bark in some places. And the blood was wrong. It was too dark, too thick, moving in ways that blood shouldn't move. As I stood over it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, the creature's eyes snapped open. They focused on me with an intelligence that sent chills down my spine. And then, impossibly, it spoke. The sound was like gravel in a blender, barely recognizable as speech. But the words I'll never forget. "Not the last," it growled. "Others. Coming." Then its eyes glazed over and it let out a final shuddering breath. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. Creatures like this didn't exist. They didn't talk, and they certainly didn't warn about others coming. But I couldn't deny the evidence of my own eyes and ears. This thing was real. It had attacked me. And now it lay dead at my feet, its last words echoing in my head like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I needed to report this, but who would believe me? How could I explain something I barely understood myself? As the adrenaline began to wear off, the full weight of what had just happened started to sink in. My world had changed forever, and I had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. With shaking hands, I reached for my radio. Static greeted me, but this time, I thought I could hear something else beneath the white noise. Voices, maybe? Or just my imagination, frayed by the stress of what I'd been through. I keyed the mic. "This is Ranger Hawkins. I need backup. Something's happened. Something bad." The static crackled, and then a voice came through, distorted but recognizable as my supervisor, Frank. "Hawkins, what's your location? What's happened?" I looked at the creature's body, already beginning to decompose at an alarming rate. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you, Frank. Just send everyone, and tell them to come armed." As I waited for backup to arrive, I couldn't shake the creature's final words. Others coming. What others? And coming from where? I had a feeling I was now part of something much bigger and much more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. And as I stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of the ranger station and the rapidly decaying body of an impossible creature, I knew that my life would never be the same again. The wait for backup felt like an eternity. Every sound, every shadow made me jump, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. By the time I heard the rumble of approaching vehicles, the creature's body had decomposed to little more than a dark stain on the floor and a lingering, acrid smell. The first face I saw was Frank's, his usual stoic expression replaced by wide-eyed shock as he took in the scene. Behind him, a team of rangers and local law enforcement filed in, their faces a mix of confusion and disbelief. "Jesus, Hawkins," Frank muttered. "What the hell happened here?" I opened my mouth to explain, but the words caught in my throat. How could I possibly describe what I'd seen, what I'd fought? I gestured weakly at the stain on the floor. There was something, an animal, I think, but not like anything I've ever seen before. Frank crouched down, examining the residue. His brow furrowed. "This isn't normal decomposition. We need to get a sample to the lab." As the team began to process the scene, I recounted my experience. I could see the doubt in their eyes, the sideways glances they exchanged. They thought I was crazy, or worse, lying. But the evidence was there, the destroyed ranger station, the strange residue, my injuries. Hours passed in a blur of questions, examinations, and forms. By the time I was allowed to leave, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. As I walked to my truck, Frank caught up with me. "Sam," he said, his voice low, "I've known you for years. You're not the type to make up stories or spook easy. But what you're describing, it's impossible." I nodded, too tired to argue. "I know, Frank, but it happened. And that thing, it said others were coming." Frank's expression hardened. "We'll increase patrols, keep an eye out. But Sam, this stays between us for now. No need to cause a panic." As I drove home that night, my mind raced. I knew what I'd seen, what I'd fought. But already I could feel the story being twisted, sanitized. By morning, I was sure it would be officially classified as a bear attack, albeit an unusually aggressive one. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Something was out there, something that shouldn't exist, and it had said others were coming. In the weeks that followed, life in the park seemed to return to normal. The incident was indeed classified as a bear attack, with officials citing my trauma-induced confusion to explain away the more fantastical elements of my account. But I knew the truth. and I wasn't the only one. It started with whispers, rumors among the rangers and local hunters. Strange tracks found deep in the woods, animals behaving erratically, and then the disappearances began. At first it was just a few hikers, nothing unusual for a park this size, but then a whole family vanished without a trace. Search parties found nothing, no bodies, no equipment, not even a scrap of clothing. I threw myself into investigating, spending every free moment combing the woods, following up on every lead, no matter how small. My colleagues started to avoid me, whispering that I'd become obsessed, that the bear attack had broken something in me. But I was getting close to something. I could feel it. It was during one of my off-duty searches that I found it, a cave hidden behind a waterfall, easy to miss if you didn't know what you were looking for. And inside, the stench hit me first, that same acrid smell from the ranger station. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw them, cocoon-like structures, pulsing with an inner light. And worst of all, I could see human shapes inside some of them. I stumbled back out of the cave, my mind reeling. This was it, proof that what I'd seen wasn't a one-off, wasn't some freak mutation. This was an infestation. I reached for my radio, ready to call it in, to demand action, but before I could, a hand clamped over my mouth. I struggled, but whoever had me was inhumanly strong. "Not yet, Ranger," a voice hissed in my ear. "You don't know what you're dealing with." As consciousness faded, my last thought was of the creature's words. Others coming. They were already here. I awoke in a sterile room, the harsh fluorescent lights burning my eyes. As my vision cleared, I saw a man in a crisp suit sitting across from me. He introduced himself as Agent Thompson from a department I'd never heard of. "Mr. Hawkins," he said, his voice coldly professional, "you've stumbled onto something much bigger than you realize. What you encountered in the woods, what you've been investigating, it goes far beyond a simple animal attack." Over the next few hours, Thompson laid out a tale that seemed ripped from the pages of a sci-fi novel. The creatures, he explained, were the result of a government experiment gone wrong, an attempt to create the perfect soldier, combining human intelligence with animal strength and adaptability. But the experiment had spiraled out of control. The creatures had escaped, fleeing into the wilderness where they began to reproduce and evolve at an alarming rate. "We've been trying to contain the situation," Thompson said, "but it's proving challenging." I listened in stunned silence, my mind struggling to process this information. Part of me wanted to laugh, to dismiss it all as an elaborate hoax. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd fought. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. Thompson's expression was grim. "Because we need your help, Mr. Hawkins. You've seen these creatures up close, you've tracked them. We need people like you if we're going to have any hope of stopping this before it gets worse." As Thompson continued to explain the situation, laying out the full scope of the threat and the government's efforts to contain it, I felt a mix of emotions wash over me. Fear, anger, disbelief, but also a sense of purpose. I had joined the Park Service to protect nature and the people who came to enjoy it. Now it seemed that duty had taken on a whole new meaning. As I left that sterile room, my world forever changed. I knew that my life would never be the same. The forests I had once seen as a place of peace and natural beauty now held dark secrets and unimaginable dangers. But I also knew that I couldn't walk away. Whatever these creatures were, wherever they had come from, they were a threat to everything and everyone I had sworn to protect. The coming days, weeks, and months would be a battle, not just against these creatures, but against disbelief, against bureaucracy, and against the very limits of what we thought was possible. But as I stepped out into the sunlight, ready to return to the park with my new knowledge and purpose, I made a silent vow. I would find a way to stop these creatures, to protect the park and the people who visited it. No matter the cost. The words of the first creature I encountered still echoed in my mind. Others coming. Well, let them come. This time, we'd be ready. As I drove back towards the Smoky Mountains, the familiar peaks looming in the distance, I couldn't help but see them differently now. Those misty ridges and deep shadowy valleys weren't just hiding natural wonders anymore. They were hiding monsters. But then again, so was I. And sometimes it takes a monster to fight a monster. The real battle was just. In 1988, I found myself working as a ranger at Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. The name's Hank Reardon, and if you'd told me then what I'd encounter in those woods, I'd have laughed it off as a campfire tale. But sometimes reality is far more terrifying than any story. I wasn't born to be a ranger. Hell, I stumbled into it after a brief, unremarkable career in construction. Swinging hammers wasn't my forte, and the promise of fresh air and open spaces lured me away from the cacophony of city life. 8 years into the job, I can say with certainty it's been both the best and worst decision I've ever made. Shenandoah National Park is a vast expanse of wilderness, over 200,000 acres of dense forest, winding rivers, and trails that snake through the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's the kind of place where you can lose yourself in minutes if you don't know what you're doing. Luckily for me, I had a knack for navigation. Little did I know that this skill would be put to the ultimate test. The day everything changed started like any other. The crisp autumn air nipped at my face as I made my way to the ranger station. The leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the landscape in a riot of reds, oranges, and golds. It was the kind of day that reminded you why you chose this life, why you decided to make your office the great outdoors. As I entered the station, I noticed a flurry of activity. My colleague, Ranger Bill Hawkins, was on the phone, his brow furrowed in concern. He motioned for me to come over as he hung up. "We've got a situation, Hank," he said, his usually jovial face etched with worry. "A hiker's gone missing, college kid named Noah Hensley. He was last seen heading up the Old Rag Mountain Trail yesterday afternoon. Didn't make it back to his campsite last night." I felt a knot form in my stomach. The Old Rag Trail was notorious, even among experienced hikers, steep, rocky, with treacherous scrambles that could turn deadly in bad weather or low light. And now we had an inexperienced kid lost up there. "Any idea how prepared he was?" I asked, already reaching for my gear. Bill shook his head. "Not much. His friend said he had a small backpack with some water and snacks. No overnight gear, though, and get this, he went up there alone." I cursed under my breath. Solo hiking was risky enough for seasoned outdoorsmen, let alone a college kid probably more used to navigating campus quads than mountain trails. "All right," I said. "I'll head up there with Emma and Tom. We'll start at the trailhead and work our way up." Emma Garrison and Tom Huxley were two of our best. If anyone could find this kid, it was us. As I gathered my equipment, first aid kit, extra water, emergency blanket, radio, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. Something about this felt off, different from our usual search and rescue operations. Outside, the sky had darkened, heavy clouds rolling in from the west. A storm was brewing, both literally and figuratively. As we loaded up our gear and prepared to head out, I caught Emma's eye. She looked as unsettled as I felt. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded, but her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. "Yeah, I don't know. Something feels wrong about this one, Hank." I couldn't agree more, but I kept that to myself. No use in spreading more anxiety. "We'll find him," I said with more confidence than I felt. "Let's move out." As our vehicle wound its way up the mountain road towards the Old Rag trailhead, I couldn't help but feel like we were heading into something far beyond our usual scope. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees casting long shadows across the road. It was as if nature itself was trying to warn us, to keep us away from whatever was waiting for us up on that mountain. But we had a job to do, a life to save. And so, into the gathering gloom we went, unaware that we were about to face a horror beyond anything we could have imagined. The Old Rag trailhead parking lot was eerily empty when we arrived. Usually, even on a weekday, you'd see a handful of cars belonging to day hikers or rock climbers. But today there was only one vehicle, a beat-up Volkswagen Beetle that I assumed belonged to our missing hiker, Noah. As we geared up, I briefed Emma and Tom on our plan. "We'll follow the main trail up to the first set of rock scrambles. That's about 3 miles in. If we don't find any sign of Noah by then, we'll split up and cover more ground. Keep your radios on at all times, and if anyone sees or hears anything unusual, call it in immediately." They nodded, their faces set with determination. We'd done search and rescue operations before, but something about this one felt different. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional gust of wind that sent leaves skittering across the ground. We set off up the trail, our boots crunching on the gravel path. The first mile was relatively easy, a gentle incline through a tunnel of trees. But as we climbed higher, the terrain became more challenging. The path narrowed, winding between massive boulders and along steep drop-offs. About 2 miles in, Tom held up a hand, signaling us to stop. "You smell that?" he asked, his nose wrinkled in disgust. I took a deep breath and immediately regretted it. A foul odor hung in the air like rotting meat left out in the sun. It was unlike anything I'd encountered in my years as a ranger, not the musky scent of a bear or the pungent spray of a skunk. This was something else entirely. "Maybe an animal carcass nearby?" Emma suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. I shook my head. "Let's keep moving, but stay alert." As we pressed on, the stench grew stronger. It seemed to cling to everything, the trees, the rocks, even our clothes. My stomach churned, and I could see Emma and Tom were equally affected. We reached the first set of rock scrambles just as the sun began to dip behind the mountains. The fading light cast long shadows across the jumble of boulders, creating a maze of dark crevices and hidden recesses. "Noah!" I called out, my voice echoing off the rocks. "Noah Hensley, can you hear us?" Silence. Then carried on the wind, a sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was faint, barely audible but unmistakable. A low guttural growl. "Did you hear that?" Emma whispered, her eyes wide. Before I could respond, Tom's voice cut through the tension. "Over here, I found something." We scrambled over to where Tom was crouched behind a large boulder. There, half buried under a pile of leaves, was a torn backpack. The fabric was shredded, not in the way that would suggest it had caught on a branch or rock, but as if something had deliberately clawed it open. With gloved hands, I carefully turned the backpack over. The gashes in the fabric were deep, and around the edges of each tear was a dark, crusty substance that looked horribly like dried blood. "Jesus," Tom muttered. "What could have done this?" I shared a grim look with Emma. We'd seen our fair share of wildlife attacks, but this was different. The damage to the backpack was too deliberate, too vicious. "Radio it in," I told Emma. "Let them know we've found what we believe to be Noah's pack, but no sign of him yet." As Emma made the call, I continued to examine the backpack. Inside I found a half-empty water bottle, a granola bar wrapper, and a crumpled map of the trail. But it was what I found in the front pocket that sent a chill down my spine. A small notebook, its pages stained with what looked like blood and filled with frantic, barely legible writing. I flipped through the pages, my sense of dread growing with each word I read. Day 1, decided to take a solo hike up Old Rag, clear my head before finals, should be back by nightfall. Day 2, got turned around, can't find the trail, it's getting dark. Thought I heard something moving in the woods, probably just an animal. Day 3, still lost, no food left, water almost gone, the noises are getting closer. It's not an animal. Oh God, I saw it. What is that thing? It's not natural. If anyone finds this, please don't come looking for me. Run, just run. The last entry trailed off into an illegible scrawl. I looked up at Emma and Tom, their faces pale in the fading light. "We need to get off this mountain," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Now." But even as the words left my mouth, I knew it was too late. From somewhere in the gathering darkness came that sound again, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the very rock beneath our feet. Whatever had taken Noah was still out there, and now it was hunting us. The growl echoed off the rocks, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We huddled together, our backs to a large boulder, eyes straining to penetrate the deepening gloom. "What the hell was that?" Tom whispered, his hand hovering near his service pistol. I shook my head, trying to quell the rising panic in my chest. In all my years as a ranger, I'd never encountered anything that made a sound like that. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a mountain lion. It was something else. "We need to move," I said, keeping my voice low. "Slowly and quietly, back the way we came." Emma nodded, her face pale but determined. "What about Noah?" The weight of the decision pressed down on me. Our job was to find and rescue the missing hiker, but every instinct I had was screaming at me to get us off this mountain as fast as possible. "We're no good to him if we're dead," I finally said. "We'll come back with more people, better equipped." We began to inch our way back down the trail, every sense on high alert. The forest around us had gone eerily quiet, as if every living creature was holding its breath, waiting. We'd made it about 100 yards when Emma suddenly froze, her hand shooting out to grab my arm. "Look," she hissed, pointing to a spot just off the trail. At first I didn't see anything. Then as my eyes adjusted, I saw it. A set of tracks in the soft earth. But these weren't any animal tracks I'd ever seen before. They were huge, easily twice the size of a bear print, with long, curved claw marks gouging deep into the soil. "What kind of animal makes tracks like that?" Tom asked, his voice trembling slightly. Before I could answer, a branch snapped somewhere in the darkness to our right. We all whirled toward the sound, flashlights cutting through the gloom. For a split second I saw it, a massive shape, hunched and twisted, its skin a mottled patchwork of fur and scales. But it was the eyes that froze the blood in my veins, glowing orbs of malevolent intelligence, fixed directly on us. Then it was gone, melting into the shadows with impossible speed for something so large. "Run!" I yelled, all thoughts of stealth forgotten. We took off down the trail, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. Behind us I could hear it crashing through the underbrush, gaining on us with terrifying speed. Emma was in the lead, her years of trail running paying off as she nimbly navigated the treacherous path. Tom and I were right behind her, our lungs burning with the effort. Suddenly, Tom's foot caught on a root, sending him sprawling. I skidded to a stop, reaching down to haul him to his feet. But as I did, I saw it again. The creature barely 20 yards behind us, its massive jaws open in a silent roar. Time seemed to slow. I saw every detail with horrifying clarity. The rows of jagged teeth, the saliva dripping from its mouth, the muscles bunching under its misshapen hide as it prepared to pounce. In that moment, I knew we were going to die. Then, from somewhere ahead, came the crack of a gunshot. The creature reared back, letting out a shriek that was part animal, part something much worse. "Come on," Emma shouted. She had doubled back, her service pistol in hand. We didn't need to be told twice. We ran, harder than I've ever run in my life, the sound of the creature's enraged howl spurring us on. We burst out of the tree line into a small clearing. In the center stood an old fire tower, its metal structure silhouetted against the night sky. "Up there," I gasped, pointing to the tower. "It's our only chance." We scrambled up the rusted metal ladder, the creature's roars growing closer with each passing second. As we reached the small platform at the top, I looked down. The creature burst into the clearing, its massive form illuminated by the pale moonlight. It circled the base of the tower, those terrible eyes fixed on us. For hours we huddled in that tower, watching as the thing below paced and snarled, occasionally hurling itself at the metal struts in a frenzy of claws and teeth. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the creature finally slunk back into the forest, but not before fixing us with one last hate-filled glare. We waited another hour before finally descending, our bodies stiff and sore, our minds struggling to process what we'd seen. As we made our way back down the mountain, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. We had seen something that shouldn't exist, something that defied explanation, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that this was only the beginning. The journey back to the ranger station was a blur of exhaustion and frayed nerves. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent our hearts racing. By the time we stumbled into the station, the sun was high in the sky, casting an incongruously cheerful light on our haggard faces. Chief Ranger Mike Callahan took one look at us and ushered us into his office, closing the door behind him. "What the hell happened out there?" he demanded, his gruff voice tinged with concern. For a moment, none of us spoke. How could we possibly explain what we'd seen? Who would believe us? Finally, I cleared my throat. "Mike, we found evidence that Noah Hensley was attacked. His backpack was torn to shreds. There was blood." Mike's face paled. "And Noah?" I shook my head. No sign of him, but there was something else out there. Something. I trailed off, unable to find the words. Emma stepped in. "Chief, we saw tracks, like nothing I've ever seen before. And we heard noises. It chased us." "Chased you?" Mike's eyebrows shot up. What chased you, a bear? Tom let out a bitter laugh. I wish it had been a bear. This was something else, Chief. Something not natural. Mike looked at each of us in turn, his expression a mix of disbelief and growing unease. All right, he said finally. I want full reports from each of you, every detail, no matter how small or unbelievable. In the meantime, I'm calling in additional support from the state police and Fish and Wildlife. Whatever's going on up there, we need to get to the bottom of it. As we left Mike's office, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. We had gone up that mountain as seasoned professionals, confident in our abilities to handle whatever nature threw our way. We had come back changed, our worldview shattered by an encounter with something that defied explanation. The next few days passed in a haze of debriefings, search parties, and sleepless nights. More rangers and state police combed the area where we had encountered the creature, but found nothing conclusive. No tracks, no fur, no sign of Noah Hensley or the thing that had taken him. It was as if the mountain itself was conspiring to hide the truth. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Even in the safety of the ranger station, I found myself jumping at shadows, my hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Emma and Tom were no better off. I could see the haunted look in their eyes, the way they flinched at sudden noises. A week after our encounter, Chief Callahan called us into his office again. The circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights and mounting pressure from above. I've got the state breathing down my neck, he said without preamble. They want answers, and frankly, so do I. Your reports. He trailed off, shaking his head. If it was anyone else, I'd say you were pulling my leg or that you'd all gone crazy. But I know you three. You're the best rangers I've got. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. Off the record, what do you think we're dealing with here? I exchanged glances with Emma and Tom. We talked about this amongst ourselves, trying to rationalize what we'd seen. But in the end, there was only one conclusion we could draw. Chief, I said slowly, I know how this is going to sound, but I think we're dealing with something not of this world, something that shouldn't exist. Mike leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, to my surprise, he nodded. I was afraid you'd say that, he said quietly. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a dusty file folder. What I'm about to show you doesn't leave this room, he said, his voice deadly serious. If anyone asks, this conversation never happened. Understood? We nodded, a sense of dread building in the pit of my stomach. Mike opened the folder and spread out a series of old photographs and reports. They were yellowed with age, some dating back to the 1950s. As I leaned in for a closer look, my blood ran cold. There, in grainy black and white, was a creature that looked disturbingly similar to what we had seen. The image was blurry, clearly taken in haste, but there was no mistaking the elongated limbs, the mottled skin, the gaping maw filled with razor-sharp teeth. What is this? Emma whispered, her voice shaking. Mike sighed heavily. It's a history we've tried to keep buried. Every few decades, something happens in these mountains. Hikers go missing. Animals are found mutilated, and there are sightings, reports of something that doesn't belong. He shuffled through the papers. 1953, 1976, 1988. Now. Always the same pattern. It appears, causes havoc for a few weeks or months, then vanishes without a trace. Why haven't we heard about this before? Tom demanded, his face flushed with anger. We should have been warned. Mike held up a hand. It was classified. Need-to-know basis only. And frankly, until now, I thought it was all bullshit. Ghost stories to scare the newbies. He looked at each of us in turn, his expression grim. But now I'm not so sure. Whatever this thing is, it's back. And if history is any indication, it's going to get worse before it gets better. As I left Mike's office that day, my mind reeling from what I'd learned, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the precipice of something monumental, something that would change not just our lives, but our understanding of the world itself. Little did I know, our encounter on the mountain was just the beginning. The real horror was yet to come. The weeks following our revelation in Mike's office were tense, to say the least. The official story was that Noah Hensley had fallen victim to a tragic hiking accident, possibly involving a bear or mountain lion. Search efforts were scaled back, then eventually called off entirely. Noah's family was devastated, of course, but they accepted the explanation. After all, what other possibility was there? But for those of us who knew the truth, there was no peace. Every day brought a new wave of anxiety, wondering if today would be the day the creature struck again. We increased patrols, especially in the areas near Old Rag Mountain, but found nothing out of the ordinary. As September gave way to October, a fragile sense of normalcy began to return to the park. The autumn colors were in full swing, drawing leaf peepers from all over the country. Campgrounds filled up, hiking trails bustled with activity, and for a while it seemed like maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was over. I should have known better. It was a crisp Friday morning in late October when the call came in. A group of campers in the Big Meadows area had reported strange noises in the night, followed by the discovery of several mutilated deer carcasses near their campsite. As I drove out to the scene with Emma, the knot in my stomach tightened. We both knew what this could mean, but neither of us wanted to say it out loud. The campsite was a scene of barely controlled chaos when we arrived. Park police had already cordoned off the area, and a small crowd of curious onlookers had gathered at the perimeter. I could see the fear and confusion on their faces. They had come here for a peaceful communion with nature, not this. We made our way to where the carcasses had been found, just beyond the tree line bordering the meadow. The smell hit me first, that same rotting, fetid odor we had encountered on Old Rag. Then I saw them. 3 deer lay in a rough semicircle, their bodies torn apart with savage efficiency. But it wasn't the gore that chilled me to the bone. It was the precision. These weren't random animal attacks. The carcasses had been arranged deliberately, almost ritualistically. As Emma and I examined the scene, cataloging evidence and taking photographs, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and more than once I caught myself whirling around, certain I had seen movement in the shadows between the trees, but there was nothing there, nothing we could see anyway. As we finished up and prepared to head back to the station, Emma grabbed my arm. "Hank," she said, her voice low and urgent, "look at this." She pointed to a nearby tree. There, carved into the bark about 7 feet up, was a symbol. It looked like a crude stick figure, but with too many limbs, its head a distorted oval with what looked like tentacles sprouting from it. "Jesus," I muttered. "What the hell is that supposed to be?" Emma shook her head, her face pale. "I don't know, but I've got a real bad feeling about this, Hank. Whatever this thing is, I think it's trying to send a message." I nodded grimly. "Yeah, and I think I know what that message is. I'm back, and I'm hungry." As we drove back to the station, the sun dipping below the horizon and casting long shadows across the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were entering a new phase of this nightmare. The creature wasn't just hunting anymore. It was playing with us, taunting us. And somehow I knew that this was just the opening move in a game we weren't prepared to play. The next 2 weeks were a blur of increased patrols, sleepless nights, and mounting tension. More reports trickled in. Hikers hearing strange noises, campers finding their sites ransacked, more mutilated animals discovered in remote areas of the park. We did our best to keep a lid on things to prevent panic from spreading. But rumors have a way of growing, especially in small communities. Whispers of a monster in the woods began to circulate among the locals. Tourism started to drop off despite the peak colors of autumn. It was a Tuesday evening when everything came to a head. I was just finishing up my shift, looking forward to a rare night off, when the call came in. A family of 4 had gone missing from their campsite in the Lewis Mountain area. Their tent was found slashed open, signs of a struggle evident, but no blood or bodies. As I raced to the scene with a team of rangers and state police, I knew in my gut that this was it. The creature had escalated from animals to humans. The game, as it were, was truly on. The campsite was a scene of controlled chaos when we arrived. Floodlights had been set up, casting harsh shadows across the clearing. Forensic teams combed the area, collecting evidence and taking photographs. But even from a distance, I could see the fear in their eyes. They knew this was no ordinary missing persons case. I made my way over to where Chief Callahan was conferring with a state police detective. Mike's face was grim as he filled me in on the details. Family of 4, parents and 2 kids, ages 8 and 12, he said, his voice low. "No sign of them anywhere, but we found this." He handed me a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a scrap of paper, torn and blood-stained. On it, in childish handwriting, were the words, "The stick man came. He's taking us to his home." I felt the blood drain from my face. "The stick man," I muttered, "like that symbol we found carved in the tree." Mike nodded. "Whatever this thing is, it's getting bolder. We need to end this, Hank. Tonight." I looked at him, surprised. "What are you suggesting?" He glanced around, making sure no one was within earshot. "I've got a team assembling. Best trackers, best shots. We're going hunting." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Mike, you can't be serious. We don't know what we're dealing with here. It's too dangerous." He fixed me with a hard stare. "And leaving that family out there with that thing isn't dangerous? We swore an oath, Hank, to protect and serve. That's what we're going to do." I knew there was no talking him out of it. And deep down I knew he was right. We couldn't just sit back and wait for more people to disappear. "All right," I said finally. "I'm in, but we do this smart. No heroes, no lone wolves. We stick together, watch each other's backs." Mike nodded, a grim smile on his face. "Wouldn't have it any other way. Gear up, we move out in 30 minutes. As I went to prepare, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something far beyond our understanding or capability. But we had no choice. The creature had thrown down the gauntlet, and we had to respond. Little did I know, as we geared up and prepared to venture into the dark heart of Shenandoah, that we were about to face a horror beyond anything we could have imagined. The true nature of the beast was about to be revealed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The night was oppressively dark as our team of 12, a mix of rangers and state police, set out from the Lewis Mountain campground. The moon was a mere sliver in the sky, offering little illumination as we made our way along the overgrown trail. We moved in silence, communicating with hand signals and the occasional whispered word. The weight of our mission hung heavy in the air. Somewhere out there, a family was in mortal danger, if they were even still alive. And the thing that had taken them was waiting. I was on point, my years of experience in these woods guiding our path. We had decided to follow a series of caves and rock formations that honeycombed this part of the park. If the creature had a lair, it was likely to be in one of these. About 2 hours into our trek, Emma, who was bringing up the rear, suddenly held up a hand, signaling us to stop. We froze, every sense on high alert. For a long moment there was nothing but the normal sounds of the forest at night. Then I heard it, a low keening wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a sound of pure anguish, not quite human, but not entirely animal either. "What the hell was that?" one of the state troopers whispered, his voice shaking. Before anyone could answer, the wail came again, louder this time. And now I could tell where it was coming from. Up ahead, near a large rock formation we locals called the Devil's Backbone. Mike signaled for us to move forward, his face set in grim determination. As we approached the rock formation, the wailing grew louder, more frantic. It was joined by other sounds, a rhythmic chanting in a language I didn't recognize, and underneath it all, a low, rumbling growl that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. We rounded a bend in the trail, and suddenly, there it was. The mouth of a cave, previously hidden by the twisting path, yawned before us. A sickly green light pulsed from within, casting writhing shadows on the rock face. The sounds were definitely coming from inside. As we watched, transfixed, a figure emerged from the cave. For a moment I thought it was human. Then it stepped into the moonlight and I had to bite back a scream. It was vaguely humanoid, but that's where the resemblance ended. Its body was emaciated, skin stretched tight over an impossible frame. Multiple limbs, I counted at least 6, sprouted from its torso at odd angles, but it was the face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. Where there should have been features, there was only a writhing mass of tentacles, surrounding a gaping maw filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. The thing paused at the entrance to the cave, its head swiveling in our direction. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that it had sensed us, that we were no longer the hunters but the hunted. For a heartbeat nobody moved. Then all hell broke loose. The creature let out a shriek that seemed to pierce right through my skull. As one, we opened fire, the sound of gunshots echoing off the rocks, but our bullets seemed to have little effect. The thing moved with impossible speed, darting between the trees and rocks. "Fall back," Mike yelled, but it was too late. The creature was among us, its limbs lashing out with terrifying strength and speed. I saw a state trooper go down, his chest caved in by a single blow. Emma was thrown against a tree, her head hitting the trunk with a sickening crack. I fired and fired, my pistol clicking empty, but the thing just kept coming. In the chaos, I lost track of the others. I could hear screams, gunshots, the wet sound of tearing flesh, and above it all, that terrible shrieking, now tinged with what sounded horribly like laughter. I don't know how long the battle lasted. It could have been minutes or hours. But eventually I found myself alone, my back pressed against the cold stone of the Devil's Backbone. My ammunition was spent, my radio smashed. In the distance I could hear the fading sounds of combat, but they were growing weaker by the moment. And then, emerging from the shadows like a nightmare-given form, came the creature. It moved slowly now, almost languidly, as if savoring the moment. Those writhing tentacles on its face seemed to reach out towards me, probing the air. As it drew closer, I realized with a start that it was speaking. The words were garbled, as if it was struggling with an unfamiliar tongue, but I could make out what it was saying. "You should not have come." I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt a presence in my mind, an alien intelligence probing my thoughts. Images flashed before my closed eyes. Vast cyclopean cities beneath the sea, strange beings moving between the stars, rituals performed in dark places that had never known the light of day. And I understood. This thing, this creature, was not of our world. It was something ancient, something that had existed long before humans walked the earth. And it had been waiting, sleeping, until we foolish mortals had stumbled upon its resting place. When I opened my eyes, the creature was gone. In its place stood a shimmering portal, a tear in the very fabric of reality. Through it, I could see glimpses of a world beyond my comprehension, a place where the laws of physics as we knew them didn't apply. Impossible geometries and colors that shouldn't exist swirled in a maddening dance. And there, at the threshold of this impossible doorway, stood the missing family. Their eyes were blank, unseeing, their bodies moving with a jerky, puppet-like motion. As I watched in horror, they stepped through the portal, vanishing into that alien realm. I wanted to scream, to run after them, to do something. But my body wouldn't respond. I was frozen in place, my mind reeling from what I had seen and understood. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the portal winked out of existence. The forest was plunged into darkness once more, the only sound my own ragged breathing. I don't know how long I sat there, my back pressed against the cold stone. It could have been minutes or hours, but eventually I heard voices calling my name. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, and I saw figures moving towards me. It was a search party, led by rangers who hadn't been part of our ill-fated expedition. They found me babbling incoherently about tentacles and portals and impossible cities. They found the bodies of my companions torn and broken in ways that defied explanation. But of the creature there was no sign, no trace of the portal, no evidence of the missing family. It was as if the entire nightmare had been a collective hallucination. In the days and weeks that followed, I tried to piece together what had happened, but the more I thought about it, the more it slipped away, like trying to hold on to the details of a dream upon waking. The official report cited a bear attack. It was easier, safer, to blame it on something familiar, something we could understand. The missing family was declared dead, lost to the unforgiving wilderness. But I knew the truth, and that truth would haunt me for the rest of my days. It's been years since that night in Shenandoah National Park. I left the ranger service not long after, unable to face the forest that had once been my home. The nightmares, when they come, are still vivid. Tentacles reaching out from the darkness, that alien intelligence probing my mind, the sight of that family stepping through the portal into a reality I couldn't comprehend. I've spent countless hours researching, trying to make sense of what we encountered. I've delved into ancient myths and legends, studied fringe theories about interdimensional beings and hidden realities. And the more I learn, the more I realize how little we truly understand about the world around us. There have been other incidents over the years, Strange sightings in remote areas, unexplained disappearances, reports of creatures that shouldn't exist. Each time I wonder if it's happening again, if that ancient horror has awakened once more. I've tried to warn people, to share what I know, but who would believe me? To most, I'm just a crazy old ex-ranger, spinning tales to scare the tourists. Even those who were there that night, who survived the encounter, have convinced themselves it was something else. A bear, a mountain lion, mass hysteria, anything but the truth. But I know what I saw. I know what's out there, waiting in the dark places of the world, and I know that one day it will return. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind whispers through the trees, I find myself looking towards the mountains. I think about that family, lost in a realm beyond our understanding. I wonder if they're still alive in some incomprehensible way, and I wonder if someday they'll find their way back. But then I remember the creature, its tentacled face and impossible form, and I pray that the barrier between our worlds remains unbroken, because if it doesn't, if that thing or others like it find their way into our reality again, then God help us all. As I sit here writing this account, I can't help but feel a sense of urgency. The world needs to know, needs to be prepared. But how do you prepare for something so far beyond our understanding? All I can do is share my story and hope that someone somewhere will believe. And maybe, just maybe, when the time comes, we'll be ready. But in my heart, I know the truth. We'll never be ready. Not for this. Not for the horrors that lurk just beyond the veil of our reality. So to anyone reading this, I offer this warning. Be careful in the wild places of the world. Respect the darkness, the unknown. And if you ever find yourself in Shenandoah National Park, keep your eyes open and your wits about you. Because sometimes the monsters in the woods are all too real. And they're hungry. Let me begin by saying that for as long as I can remember, the ability to perceive spirits and otherworldly entities has run through my family like an invisible thread, tying us to the strange and supernatural. This uncanny sensitivity seems to manifest most strongly on my father's side, tracing back generations to my great-great-grandmother Esther, a formidable woman rumored to possess second sight. Family lore is rife with hushed tales of Esther's eerie premonitions, of how she could divine a person's secrets with a single penetrating look. As a child, I delighted in these stories of my spooky ancestress, begging my father to recount them over and over until I could recite them by heart. It was my father who first discovered his own psychic gift when he was just 12 years old. The way he told it, he had been exploring the dense woods behind his parents' farmhouse, following the erratic flittings of a blue morpho butterfly. The day was hot and still, the air thick with the drone of cicadas. As he pushed deeper into the green gloom, ducking under low-hanging branches festooned with lacy curtains of Spanish moss, a sudden chill prickled his spine. The hairs on his arms stood at attention and his breath plumed before him despite the muggy heat. He froze, some primal instinct screaming danger. Slowly, hardly daring to breathe, he turned his head. There, hovering between two gnarled oaks, was the translucent figure of a woman. She wore a long, old-fashioned dress, high-collared and severe. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight bun at the nape of her neck. She stared at him across the decades with mournful, luminous eyes, her pale hands clasped before her. As he gaped in shock, she slowly raised one arm and pointed deeper into the forest, before shimmering out of existence like mist under the sun. Heart threatening to pound out of his chest, my father considered fleeing back to the safety of home, but curiosity and a strange magnetic pull drew him onward in the direction the specter had indicated. Barely 50 yards from where she had appeared, he stumbled into a small clearing. Sunlight filtered greenly through the leaves, dappling the forest floor in golden shadow. And there, in the center of the clearing, was a small, unmarked grave. A roughly hewn wooden cross tilted drunkenly to one side, the only marker of the body laid to rest beneath the loamy earth. That was the first ghost my father ever saw, but it was far from the last. As he grew older, he learned to hone his extrasensory perception, to attune himself to the subtle energies and auras that swirled unseen around people and places. His reputation as a powerful medium spread, first in whispers through our small Ohio town, then to neighboring counties and beyond. People sought him out for spiritual guidance, to communicate with departed loved ones, to cleanse homes and businesses of negative energies. He accepted it all with calm grace and a quiet, unshakable faith in his purpose. By the time I came along, my father had fully embraced his identity as a psychic counselor and paranormal investigator. Some of my earliest memories are of strangers appearing at our front door, their eyes haunted and their voices trembling as they begged for my father's help. He always welcomed them in, listened to their stories with grave empathy, and did his best to provide aid and comfort. I would watch from the stairs, my small hands gripping the balustrade, as he would sit with them in our cozy living room, holding their hands and gazing into the distance with a look of intense concentration. Sometimes, late at night, I would sneak out of bed and creep halfway down the stairs, straining to catch snatches of the adult conversations drifting up from below. The otherworldly tales I overheard thrilled and terrified me in equal measure. Banshees keening in the night, poltergeists hurling furniture, shadow figures looming in dark hallways. My child's mind transformed them into delicious horrors, campfire stories to whisper to my wide-eyed friends on muggy summer nights. But it wasn't all second-hand supernatural excitement. I had my own brushes with the unknown, fleeting moments that hinted at the psychic sensitivity I had inherited. Objects would inexplicably move overnight in my room, my favorite stuffed animals arranged in a tidy circle on the floor. Ethereal wisps, like curls of pale smoke, would dance in my peripheral vision. And then there were the dreams, vivid, intense, and saturated with eerie symbolism. I would wake panting and drenched in icy sweat, the details already evaporating in the light of dawn. It all came to a head in the summer of 1985, when I was 9 years old. We had just moved to the ramshackle old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, a behemoth of weathered wood and sagging gutters set on 10 acres of sprawling woods and fields. The nearest neighbor was over a mile away, the night so dark and still you could imagine you were the last person on earth. To me it was heaven, a wild expanse to roam, trees to climb, and more freedom than I had ever known. My little sister Lily, just 7 at the time, was more hesitant about our new rural home. She missed her friends from our old neighborhood and the bustle of town. The country quiet unnerved her, the vast open spaces seeming more eerie than peaceful. She stuck close to the house those first few weeks, a small, pale ghost peering out the windows. Dad, for his part, seemed energized by the move. He had a new lightness in his step, a gleam in his eye as he talked about the good energy of the place. Looking back, I suspect the isolation appealed to him, the freedom to fully engage in his unconventional work without prying eyes and wagging tongues. He could meet with clients in privacy, perform intense spiritual workings without worrying about the neighbors. I think it was that very isolation, that veil of secrecy, that allowed the darkness to take root. It began slowly, subtly, like a drop of black ink swirling into a glass of clear water. Small things at first, easy to dismiss. Creaks and groans in the night that could be attributed to the old house settling, sudden chills that pebbled our skin there and gone in a heartbeat. Lily, hollow-eyed and listless, pushing her breakfast around her plate without eating. Then came the whispering, soft, sibilant, like leaves skittering across a cold ground. It seemed to emanate from the very walls, the empty spaces in the shadows. I would freeze, straining to make out words in the white noise hiss. It never rose above a murmur, but it filled me with formless dread, a bone-deep certainty that the whispers harbored ancient malice. When I finally worked up the courage to mention it to Dad, he frowned, a familiar crease appearing between his eyebrows. He tilted his head as if listening for something beyond the range of normal human hearing. After a long, taut moment, his shoulders relaxed, and he smiled reassuringly. "It's nothing to worry about, son. Just the spirit of a little girl making her presence known. She drowned in the pond out back decades ago, poor thing. But she means no harm. She's just a bit of a trickster, that's all." I wanted to believe him. I clung to the comfort of his words like a life raft in the chilly sea of my own fear, and for a while it worked. Dad's calm confidence was a balm, his explanations a candle in the dark. We even gave the spirit a cute nickname, Abby, short for Abigail. Abby's shenanigans were unsettling but relatively innocuous at first. Lights would flicker and dim, bulbs burning out with startling regularity. Our milk would spoil overnight, souring in the fridge despite the cold. Doors would open and shut themselves, their hinges shrieking like damned souls. It became a macabre sort of routine, just another quirk of our eccentric home. But as the sticky Ohio summer crept on, Abby's tricks took on a sharper edge. Lily's dolls would end up arranged in disturbing tableaus, their glassy eyes staring accusingly from high shelves. Angry welts would appear on our skin as we slept, vivid red scratches like the marks of small fingernails. And over it all hung the cloying stench of stagnant water, the thick scent of the pond on a breezeless day. Through it all, Dad remained unflappable, his faith in his spectral abilities absolute. When I came to him in near tears after a particularly vicious nightmare, he gathered me into a tight hug and stroked my hair. "Abby's just trying to get attention, kiddo, like any child acting out. We have to show her love and understanding, prove that we're not scared of her. She'll come around, you'll see." I nodded against his chest, breathing in the comforting scent of his aftershave. I wanted so badly for him to be right. But deep in my young bones, an ancestral knowing whispered that something was very, very wrong. Everything came to a terrifying head on a sweltering night in late August. The air was thick and soupy, the crickets and frogs symphonic in the darkness. I lay restless atop sweat-damp sheets, the old box fan in the window providing little relief. Tossing and turning, I tried to ignore the uneasiness trickling along my nerves like icy fingers. The clock ticked over to 3 o'clock, a dot M, the witching hour. At that precise moment, an ungodly scream tore through the house. It was high and ragged with terror, a woman's voice on the ragged edge of sanity. My blood turned to ice in my veins. It was coming from Lily's room. I was out of bed in an instant, my bare feet slapping against the worn wood floors. I burst through Lily's door, heart lodged somewhere in my throat. My sister was sitting bolt upright in bed, her dark hair plastered to her forehead in lank strands. Her eyes were huge in the pale oval of her face, stark terror in every line of her small body. "Lily, what's wrong? What happened?" My words came out high and panicky, my breath sawing in my throat. Slowly, tremulously, she raised a quivering hand and pointed to the far corner of the room. I followed the line of her finger, a leaden weight settling in my gut. There, crouched in the gloom where the feeble moonlight failed to reach, was a shape. It was vaguely human in outline, but grotesquely distorted, its limbs too long and its head bulbous and misshapen. As I stared in horrified fascination, it unfolded from its contorted crouch with a liquid, boneless grace that turned my stomach. It seemed to absorb the darkness around it like a stain spreading in reverse. Then, as if sensing my gaze, its head snapped up with a cracking speed that defied physics. 2 pinprick points of baleful red light glared out of the writhing shadows of its face, piercing me to the core. Malevolence and a terrible ancient hunger rolled off the thing in palpable waves, pressing down on my mind like the crushing pressure in the deep ocean. I opened my mouth to scream for my father, but my throat was paralyzed, my lungs seized in bands of ice. I could only stand rooted to the spot in mute horror as the entity slowly unfurled to its full, imposing height. The shadows peeled away from it like flayed skin, revealing pallid, grayish flesh stretched tight over an emaciated frame. Straggles of lank, dark hair hung in a parody of a child's style. But it was the eyes that shattered me, crimson wells of inhuman rage and bottomless sorrow. No child's eyes had ever looked like that, held that fathomless well of despair. It took a single gliding step towards us, its movements jerky and puppet-like. That was all it took to break the spell holding me immobile. Galvanized by pure primal terror, I grabbed Lily's icy hand and ran, yanking her behind me hard enough to draw a yelp. We flew down the dark hall to our parents' room, literally falling through the door. Dad was already up, his face lined with concern in the glow of the bedside lamp. Mom, her dark hair tumbling around her shoulders, clutched the quilt with white-knuckled fingers. "What in the world?" Dad started, but his words cut off as he registered our wild eyes, the stark fear etched into every line of our bodies. "It's Abby," I gasped out. "But she's not right, Dad. That thing in Lily's room, it's not human, it's evil, it's—" My voice cracked and dissolved on a sob. Lily pressed against my side, small and shaking. Dad's face hardened, a steely resolve settling over his features. He turned to my mother, some wordless communication passing between them. "Stay with the kids," he said grimly, already moving towards the door. For the first time I could remember, real fear shadowed his eyes. It made him look older, more vulnerable, just a man, not the unshakable pillar of strength I had always seen him as. Mom wrapped her arms around us as Dad slipped from the room, a sense of something momentous and terrible looming in the musty air. I remember the sound of his footsteps receding down the hall, the creak of the floorboards like bones straining under a malignant weight. The silence that followed was a heavy, watchful thing, gravid with unspeakable possibilities. 1 minute became 2, then 5, then 10. The night pressed close, a smothering black void hungering to consume us. I shivered in my mother's embrace, chilled to the marrow despite the sticky heat. When the scream came, it was a blade straight to the heart. High and agonized, it ripped through the deathly hush like a serrated knife. I will never forget that sound, the sheer animal pain and terror of it. It was my father's voice, but twisted into something raw and unrecognizable. Mom was already moving, shoving us behind her and scrabbling frantically in the bedside drawer. Her hand emerged clutching a small silver crucifix, the metal winking coldly in the lamplight. Lips moving in soundless prayer, she advanced towards the door, her entire body trembling like a leaf in a gale. And the darkness answered. A frigid wind howled through the house, rattling the windows in their frames and slamming doors with a violence that shook the very foundations. The temperature plummeted with a startling abruptness, our breaths pluming before us in panicked puffs. Shadows writhed along the walls, taking on grotesque shapes that gibbered and danced in the flickering light. The stench of rot and fetid water rose like a miasma, clogging the back of my throat with cloying sweetness. Despair crashed over me in a black wave, the bone-deep certainty that all hope was lost, that we were tiny, insignificant creatures caught in the maw of something vast and utterly malign. In that moment of soul-crushing hopelessness, as the darkness closed in like a fist and the unearthly screams of my father echoed in my ears, something shifted inside me. A small, bright spark of defiance kindled to life in my chest, a stubborn flicker that refused to be snuffed out. It was the ember at the core of me, the inherited strength of my father and his father before him, a legacy of those who stared into the abyss and refused to blink. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, I grabbed the silver crucifix from my mother's numb fingers. Its weight was reassuring in my palm, the metal warming to my touch. I squared my narrow shoulders and stepped towards the roiling mass of shadows blocking the door, heart pounding a war drum in my chest. "Leave us alone." The words tore out of me in a ragged shout, my voice cracking with the force of my terror and desperate bravery. "You're not welcome here, Abby, or whatever you are. This is our home, and you can't have it or us." I thrust the crucifix out before me, my small hand shaking but resolute. For a moment the only sound was the blood rushing in my ears and the rasp of my rapid breaths. The shadows stilled, the unnatural wind dying as suddenly as it had risen. Then, like oil fleeing from water, the darkness began to recede. It peeled back from the walls and door, slinking away into the far corners of the room. As it withdrew, as the darkness receded, I caught a glimpse of what lay beyond the door, out in the hallway. My father lay crumpled against the far wall, his head lolling at an unnatural angle. Blood matted his hair and pooled beneath him in a dark, viscous puddle. For a moment the world tilted dizzyingly on its axis, and I thought I might pass out. But then I saw the shallow rise and fall of his chest, the flutter of his eyelids, and relief crashed through me like a tidal wave. He was alive. Badly hurt, but alive. In that moment the last of the shadows vanished, taking with them the unnatural cold and the reek of stagnant water. The house was still and quiet, the only sound the ragged sawing of our collective breathing. I realized I was still holding the crucifix before me, my knuckles white around its silver length. Slowly, hardly daring to believe it was truly over, I lowered my trembling arm. The next few hours passed in a blur of flashing lights, urgent voices, and the acrid scent of antiseptic. Paramedics, police, a horde of grim-faced men in dark suits who spoke in low, clipped tones. Through it all we huddled together in shocked silence, watching our cozy world come undone at the seams. In the end, there was no tidy explanation, no easy answers to wrap up the horror in a neat bow. The official report spoke of a disturbed transient, a tragic home invasion with an almost supernatural edge. But we knew the truth, a truth too dark and strange for the harsh light of day. In the weeks that followed, as Dad recovered from his injuries and we struggled to pick up the tattered pieces of our lives, I threw myself into research with a fervor bordering on obsession. Long nights in the library, poring over dusty tomes and faded newspaper clippings, seeking any scrap of information about the history of our land, the restless spirits that called it home. What I uncovered chilled me to the bone. Tales of settlers vanishing without a trace, of dark rituals and blood-soaked soil, whispers of a malevolent entity older than human memory, a darkness that hungered for the innocent. And threading through it all, a familiar theme, a little girl, dark-haired and doomed, her tragic fate forever binding her to this cursed place. With each new revelation, the icy claws of dread sank deeper into my heart. I knew with a grim, unshakable certainty that our ordeal was far from over. The evil we had faced was merely a harbinger, a taste of the darkness to come. It had marked us, claimed us in some fundamental way, and it would never let us go. But even as despair threatened to consume me, I clung to the memory of that small, defiant spark that had ignited within me in our darkest hour. The legacy of my father's courage, the stubborn refusal to surrender in the face of overwhelming odds. I knew that wherever this twisted path might lead, whatever fresh horrors lay in wait, we would face them as we always had. Together, as a family, drawing strength from the unbreakable bonds of blood and love. Our battle was just beginning, but we would not face it alone. In the coming years, as I honed my abilities and delved ever deeper into the world of the unseen, I would find others like myself, gifted, cursed, bound by the eternal struggle against the forces of darkness. Together we would stand as a light in the shadows, a bulwark against the hungry void that sought to consume us all. The road ahead was long and shrouded in uncertainty, but I knew one thing with bone-deep conviction. Whatever trials lay in store, whatever sacrifices demanded, I would never stop fighting. For my father, for Lily, for the innocent and the lost. I would take up the mantle passed down through generations, the sacred duty to defend the living from the depredations of the dead. I was a child no longer, but a soldier in an ancient war. My weapons would be salt and silver, sage and blessed steel. My strength, the love and faith of those who stood beside me. And though the darkness might press close, though the night seem endless and filled with teeth, I would never forget the lesson of that fateful summer. Even in the deepest shadows there is always a spark of light, a glimmer of hope, fragile yet indomitable. And it is from these sparks that the greatest fires are born, the cleansing flames that chase the darkness back and remind us of who we are, children of the sun, unbowed and unafraid. There are places in this world where the boundary between the known and unknown grows thin, where the familiar comfort of civilization gives way to something older and more primal. The cabin in the mountains was such a place, though I didn't realize it at first. It's funny how memory works. The details that seemed insignificant at the time now stand out with crystal clarity, each one a warning sign I was too young to recognize. I can still draw every inch of that cabin from memory, though I haven't set foot there in years. The structure commanded a breathtaking view of the surrounding wilderness, perched on the mountainside like an eagle's nest. Its most distinctive feature was the deck, a massive wooden platform that wrapped around the building in a C-shape, creating an observation post from which to survey the wild beauty of the mountain landscape. But that deck would later feel more like a stage, with us as unwitting performers for something watching from the trees. The cabin had two entrances, each seemingly designed to serve a different purpose. The main entrance faced south, with a modest 4-degree incline that welcomed visitors with deceptive warmth. The western entrance, however, was more dramatic. 15 wooden steps descended roughly 10 feet to a meadow below, each step weathered by countless seasons of rain and snow. I would later come to understand that these dual entrances had inadvertently created two distinct approaches for anything that might want to reach us. The western face of the cabin featured what would become the focal point of my nightmares, a wall of panel glass windows that connected to two smaller windows, with a screen door positioned directly underneath. During the day, these windows transformed the cabin's interior into an observatory, flooding it with natural light and offering panoramic views of the surrounding wilderness. But as darkness fell, they became something else entirely. Black mirrors that reflected our own lights back at us, while concealing whatever might be lurking in the darkness beyond. This story begins when my mother and her boyfriend decided to take a cruise, leaving me in the care of his parents, Mary and Ben. They were good people, the kind who treated me like their own flesh and blood despite the lack of any official family ties. Kenny, my mom's boyfriend's brother, often joined us on family outings. He had a way of making everything feel lighter, more normal, even when normal was the last thing life had in store for us. When they suggested a trip to the cabin, I hesitated. There had been a previous visit, one that had left me with memories I'd tried to bury deep in my subconscious. But how do you explain to adults that you're afraid of something you can't even name? How do you voice fears that sound irrational even in your own head? So I agreed, telling myself that this time would be different. This time, I wouldn't be alone. The drive up the mountain should have been my first warning. As we ascended, the familiar world of highways and gas stations gave way to something wilder, more ancient. The trees seemed to press closer to the road with each mile, their branches reaching overhead like grasping fingers. The quality of the light changed too, becoming somehow thinner, less substantial. Mary and Ben filled the car with stories of previous visits, happy memories meant to set me at ease. But beneath their words, I could sense the mountain's watchful silence. The cabin appeared exactly as I remembered it, yet somehow different. Perhaps it was the angle of the sun, or the way the shadows fell across its weathered boards. But something about it seemed more deliberate than before, as if it had been waiting for our return. The air felt different up here, thinner, yes, but also charged with an energy I couldn't quite identify. As we unloaded our bags and began the process of making the cabin livable, I found my eyes drawn repeatedly to the treehouse visible from the western deck. It stood as a dark silhouette against the afternoon sky, its crude construction somehow more sinister than I remembered. During my last visit, something had happened there, something I'd convinced myself was just a product of an overactive imagination. Now, seeing it again, those suppressed memories began to surface like bubbles in dark water. The afternoon passed in a blur of domestic activity. Mary organized the kitchen while Ben checked the generator and water systems. Kenny and I carried in supplies, our footsteps echoing on the wooden deck. With each trip, I felt the weight of unseen eyes growing heavier. The forest around us had fallen into an unnatural silence, broken only by the sound of our own movements and voices. As evening approached, we settled into what should have been a comfortable routine. Mary prepared dinner, a hearty stew that filled the cabin with warm, homey scents that seemed at odds with the growing tension I felt. Ben and Kenny became engrossed in a college football game, their commentary providing a soundtrack of normalcy that only heightened my sense of unreality. I helped with the dishes afterward, grateful for the mundane task that kept my hands busy and my mind occupied. The storm arrived without warning. One moment, the evening was clear and calm. The next, clouds had rolled in from behind the mountain, bringing with them an electricity that made the hair on my arms stand on end. The first rumble of thunder felt like a physical presence in the cabin, rattling the windows in their frames. I had dozed off on the couch during the football game, but the storm's arrival jolted me awake with a clarity that felt almost painful. The clock on the wall read just past midnight. The others had already retired to their rooms, leaving me alone in the main living area. Lightning flashed outside, transforming the wall of windows into a brilliant display of nature's power. In those brief moments of illumination, the forest beyond the glass seemed to shift and move in ways that defied natural law. Making my way upstairs to my bed in the loft area, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My bed was positioned near the edge of the open space, offering a clear view of those massive windows. As I lay there, trying to convince myself that the shadows moving across the glass were just tree branches in the wind. Another flash of lightning revealed something that turned my blood to ice. Pressed against the glass was a face that still haunts my dreams to this day. It was simultaneously human and inhuman, familiar yet impossibly alien. The creature's eyes were pitch black, seeming to absorb what little light remained rather than reflect it. Its hair was plastered to its skull by the rain, creating dark rivulets that ran down a face that somehow mimicked human features, while entirely missing the mark of humanity. The nose was flat, almost non-existent, and its mouth was like a gorilla's, but with an intelligence behind it that made it far more terrifying than any animal's features could ever be. In that moment of paralyzed terror, my mind tried desperately to rationalize what I was seeing. Perhaps it was a trick of the light, a reflection distorted by raindrops on the glass. But as another flash of lightning illuminated the scene, the creature's face moved, pressing closer to the window, its black eyes fixed on mine with an intelligence that spoke of hunger, not physical hunger, but something deeper, more existential. My body moved of its own accord, carrying me downstairs to the kitchen in a dreamlike state. Later I would wonder why I hadn't screamed, hadn't run to wake the others. But in that moment I felt drawn into a private performance, a dance between predator and prey that demanded silence. I crouched behind the bar-style counter, pressing myself against the kitchen cupboards beneath the sink. The granite countertop felt cool against my back, its solidity offering a brief moment of comfort in a world that had suddenly lost all sense of normalcy. The tapping started then, gentle at first, like raindrops against glass, but growing more insistent. It moved around the cabin, following the C-shaped deck as if the creature was testing each window, searching for a way in. The sound grew closer, more deliberate, until it reached the small window above the kitchen sink. Against every instinct for self-preservation, I found myself looking up. The face that greeted me was inches away, separated only by a pane of glass that suddenly seemed terrifyingly fragile. The creature's features were even more horrifying up close. Its skin had a texture that reminded me of wet leather, stretched too tight over a skull that wasn't quite the right shape. The rain continued to stream down its face, but the water seemed to avoid its eyes, those terrible, bottomless eyes that held me frozen in place. A whimper escaped my throat, and the creature's mouth moved in response. It wasn't a smile, not exactly, but rather a parody of one, as if it had studied human expressions but couldn't quite master their execution. The movement revealed teeth that gleamed dully in the darkness, too many teeth, arranged in ways that dental anatomy had never intended. The sound of the doorknob rattling broke the spell. The creature's head snapped toward the noise with an inhuman quickness, and I seized the opportunity to press myself closer to the floor, curling into a fetal position. My body shook uncontrollably, tears streaming down my face as I tried to make myself as small as possible. Kenny's appearance was like a lifeline thrown to a drowning person. He had emerged from his room to use the bathroom, his footsteps heavy with sleep. The normalcy of his presence, his rumpled t-shirt, his hair sticking up at odd angles, created such a stark contrast to the horror I had just witnessed that I nearly laughed out loud in hysteria. "What are you doing?" His voice cut through the darkness, thick with concern and confusion. I couldn't answer. My throat had closed up, strangled by fear and the absolute certainty that if I tried to explain what I had seen, the words would somehow make it more real, more present. The sound of our voices brought Mary from her room, her maternal instincts awakened by the distress in Kenny's tone. She found me still huddled on the floor, shaking like a leaf in a storm. The warmth of her hand on my shoulder felt like an anchor to reality, but even as she and Kenny tried to comfort me, my eyes kept darting to the windows, searching for any sign of the creature's return. They moved me to their third bedroom for the remainder of the night, a gesture of kindness that spoke volumes about their understanding of true terror, even if they didn't know its source. The room was smaller, with only one window, and they pulled the curtains tight before leaving me. But sleep was impossible. Every gust of wind, every raindrop against the glass carried the possibility of its return. Morning came with an almost supernatural swiftness, as if the night had been shortened by some cosmic mercy. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and innocent in the early light. But the peace was deceptive. Something had fundamentally changed in the fabric of reality, and I knew with bone-deep certainty that I could never view the world the same way again. We packed quickly, making excuses about early appointments and forgotten commitments. No one questioned my obvious relief as we drove away from the cabin, the mountain growing smaller in the rearview mirror. The normal world seemed to reassert itself with each mile of descent, but I could feel the weight of those black eyes following us, a presence that no amount of distance could entirely dispel. When my parents returned from their cruise, suntanned and relaxed, they found me changed. Mary and Ben had naturally told them about finding me in distress that night, but how could I explain what had really happened? How do you describe a creature that exists in the spaces between what we know and what we fear? My mother tried to get me to open up about both encounters, this one and the previous visit that had first planted the seeds of terror in my mind. But some experiences defy explanation, residing instead in the realm of primal memory where language fears to tread. Years have passed since that night, each one putting more distance between me and the events at the cabin. I've researched countless cryptid encounters, looking for something that matches what I saw. Some accounts come close, descriptions of Sasquatch with two human features, stories of wendigos that blur the line between man and beast, tales of skinwalkers that observe human behavior with terrible intelligence. But none quite capture the specific horror of what I encountered. The layout of the cabin now seems prophetic in hindsight, the wraparound deck creating a perfect pathway for something to circle its prey. Those vast windows transforming from portals to mirrors as darkness fell. The 15 steps down to the meadow where I now believe it had been watching us all along. The treehouse's collapse, which I witnessed the next morning, feels particularly significant now. Perhaps it had served as some kind of territorial marker, its destruction a sign that we had overstayed our welcome in a domain that wasn't ours to claim. Sometimes, late at night when rain streams down my windows, I find myself remembering the texture of its skin, the way water seemed to avoid those pitch-black eyes. The memory is so vivid that I catch myself checking the locks multiple times, drawing curtains tight against the darkness. The rational part of my mind insists there must be a logical explanation for what I saw that night. A bear standing upright, perhaps, or a particularly large primate that had somehow escaped captivity. But deep in my bones, I know these explanations are just comfortable lies we tell ourselves to avoid facing a more terrifying truth. The incident changed how I interact with the world in subtle but profound ways. Large windows make me uneasy, especially at night. The sound of rain against glass triggers an involuntary shudder. I find myself constantly aware of sight lines, positioning myself with my back to walls, avoiding situations where I might be observed without realizing it. These aren't conscious choices anymore, but instincts burned into my psyche by that single night of terror. What haunts me most isn't the creature's appearance, horrifying as it was, but the intelligence I saw in those eyes. This wasn't just an animal acting on instinct. There was purpose in its actions, a methodical quality to the way it moved around the cabin, testing our reactions. The tapping wasn't random. It was communication of a sort, though I dread to think what message it was trying to convey. I've often wondered why it chose to reveal itself to me specifically. Was it because I was young, more open to seeing things that adults might automatically dismiss? Or was there something about me that drew its attention, some quality that made me more susceptible to its presence? The questions pile up like fallen leaves, each one leading to darker speculations. The mountains themselves seem different to me now. What once represented adventure and natural beauty has become something more sinister, a reminder that humanity's dominion over the natural world is more fragile than we care to admit. There are places where our carefully constructed reality thins out, where something older and wilder peers through the cracks. The cabin, I've come to believe, was built on one of these boundaries. Mary and Ben never returned to the cabin after that night. They sold it a year later, telling everyone it was because the upkeep had become too demanding as they aged. But I caught them exchanging looks sometimes when the subject came up, and I wonder if they saw something too, something they chose not to acknowledge even to themselves. Kenny became more protective of me after that night, though we never discussed what had happened. Sometimes silence speaks volumes about what we're afraid to voice aloud. The new owners renovated the cabin extensively, I heard, They removed the wraparound deck, replaced the wall of windows with something more modest, more manageable. Part of me wonders if they sensed something wrong with the original design, some fatal flaw that made it too inviting to things that prefer to remain unseen. Or perhaps they too had an encounter they couldn't explain, one that drove them to modify their territory, to create barriers between themselves and whatever lurks in the darkness beyond. I've researched the history of the area since then, digging through local newspapers and historical records. The mountains have a long history of disappearances, hikers who strayed from marked trails, campers who vanished without a trace. Most were explained away as accidents or animal attacks, but some cases remain unsolved. I wonder now how many others might have seen what I saw, but either couldn't or wouldn't tell their stories. The creature's face appears in my dreams sometimes, pressed against invisible glass, watching with those terrible eyes. In these dreams, I'm never quite sure which side of the glass I'm on, whether I'm the one being watched, or if I've somehow become the watcher. I wake from these nightmares with a profound sense of dislocation, as if I've glimpsed something fundamental about reality that I was never meant to understand. Weather reports from that night show nothing unusual, just a typical mountain storm, the kind that rolls in without warning and disappears just as quickly. But I remember how the rain seemed to move against gravity around the creature's face, how the lightning illuminated things that shouldn't have been possible. Science can explain the storm, but it can't account for the way reality itself seemed to bend that night, warping around the presence of something that shouldn't exist. The incident has left me with a heightened awareness of the unexplained, a sensitivity to those moments when the ordinary world seems to slip slightly out of alignment. I notice things now that I might have overlooked before, the way animals sometimes freeze and stare at empty spaces, how shadows sometimes move independently of their casters, the peculiar quality of silence that descends just before something significant occurs.